You've heard of the Grand Canyon, but have you ever considered the silence beneath it? Carlsbad Caverns, tucked in the Guadalupe Mountains of New Mexico, is a place where the earth opens up like a secret mouth. These caves aren't just beautiful, they're mysterious. Some say the silence there is too deep, too heavy, as if the stone itself is holding its breath. There are stories of strange lights in the dark, of footsteps where no one walked, and of a sound like a child's cry that echoes through the stone when no one is around. And then there are the disappearances. Some say the caves don't just swallow the lost, they keep them, quiet and waiting for the right moment to let them go. So, what do you think? Is it the silence, or something else that waits in the dark? Or maybe, it's just the stone remembering what it once held. You know, the Carlsbad Caverns weren't always a tourist trap. Back in the 1800s, they were a secret hideout for a band of outlaws. The stories say they used the caves to stash loot and plan their next heist. These outlaws weren't just any criminals, they were a group of miners who turned to banditry after a mine collapse left them in debt and desperate. They called themselves the Cave Dwellers. The caves became a place of fear and fascination. Some say the echoes of their footsteps still linger, and the sound of running water hides the whispers of their final goodbyes. But the real mystery is this: when the caves were finally opened to the public in the early 1900s, the outlaws had already vanished. No bodies, no clues, just silence and the memory of their shadowy deeds. And now, as you walk through the same tunnels they once ran through, you might wonder, did they truly disappear, or are they still here, waiting for the right moment to speak? You remember the first time you heard the whisper in the dark, just before the silence swallowed it whole. It wasn't a voice, not really, more like a breath held too long, waiting for something to follow. The sound came again, softer this time, like the rustle of something moving just beyond the edge of your hearing. You turned, but there was nothing there, only the cold stone and the weight of the unknown pressing in. Then came the echo, not of a voice, but of a sound you hadn't made. A low, guttural hum, like the cave itself was breathing. And for a moment, you thought you heard a laugh, too, just barely, at the edge of your hearing. You looked around, half expecting to see something, but the darkness held its breath. It wasn't just empty, it was listening. And you, for the first time, weren't sure if you were the one being watched. You ever wonder what happens when a place is too quiet? Well, Carlsbad Caverns wasn't always so still. In 1958, a young woman named Linger disappeared without a sound. No trace, no warning, just silence. She was last seen climbing the Great Heron, a natural rock formation that overlooks the caverns. Her friends say she was just being adventurous, but the rocks never talk and the caves never forget. The search for Linger turned up nothing. No body, no clues, just the echo of her absence. Some say the caves took her, others say she vanished into the silence of her own mind. But the real mystery is why she went in the first place. What if the silence wasn't just the caves, but a warning? What if Linger heard something no one else could? The silence in those tunnels is heavy, like a weight pressing down on your chest. It doesn't just echo, it holds its breath. And now, every time you hear the wind whisper through the stone, you wonder, was it a Linger, or just the caves remembering what they took? I remember the first time I heard the whispers in the caves. It was a warm spring day, and the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and wildflowers. The silence was so deep, it felt like the world had forgotten to breathe. One of the older hikers, a retired school teacher named Margaret, swore she saw a figure in the distance, just a silhouette, but it moved too fast for the eye to follow. She said it vanished the moment she turned to look. Then there's the sound of faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingers on a stone wall. Some say it's the echo of a heartbeat, others claim it's the sound of something moving underground. But no one can explain why it always stops when you turn around. I asked a park ranger about it once, and he just laughed. He said it was the sound of the wind, or maybe the rocks shifting. But I've seen the footage, there's something in there, watching, or waiting. And then there are the children. Some say they hear the voices at night, calling from the dark. Others say they saw a light in the cave, and when they followed, they never came back. But the cave never tells the truth. So, I ask you, what do you think it is? A trick of the light? A memory of the past? Or something that never wanted to be found again? We followed the trail of whispers through the winding passageways where the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and ancient dust. The silence was so deep, it felt like the caverns themselves were holding their breath. The first clue was a faded journal tucked behind a loose rock. Its pages were yellowed, and the ink had faded, but the words still spoke of a voice that echoed through the dark, never quite reaching the surface. Then there was the sound, soft, like a whisper of wind through a hollow tree. We turned, but there was nothing, only the sound, and the feeling that someone or something was watching us from the shadows. We found a series of strange symbols carved into the stone, almost like a message left behind by someone long gone. Some looked like warnings, others like pleas for help. all in a language we could not decipher. And then, in one of the deepest chambers, we found a small, empty space, as if it had once held something that had been taken. The air was colder there, and the silence was heavier, like the weight of unspoken sorrow. The investigation ended with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: the Carlsbad Caverns were not just a place of wonder. They were a place where something still waited, still listened, and still remembered. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about this case is the one detail that has never been explained. The way the miners vanished, like they just disappeared into the stone. No bodies, no screams, just silence. Like the earth itself swallowed them whole, and the only thing left was a whisper in the rock. Some say it's the sound of the wind through the passages, or the echo of a long-forgotten prayer. But I keep wondering, what if it's something else entirely? The real mystery isn't where they went, it's why they went at all, and what they found that no one ever came back to tell. And that, dear friends, is the one detail that has never been explained. The silence that lingers in the stone, waiting for someone to finally listen. You've heard the stories, but let's talk about the people who keep them alive. The locals, the ones who grew up here, still whisper about the ones who vanished in the dark. They say the caves don't just take people, they take memories, too. Some say the caves are cursed, that they're not just empty spaces but ancient prisons. Others believe the disappearances are no accident, something in the rock, something that waits, listens, and then takes. Others believe the caves are a kind of gateway, that the deep, dark tunnels lead to something beyond the world we know, that the screams you hear aren't from the past but from somewhere else entirely. And then there are the quietest of theories, that the people who disappeared were never really lost, that they were just forgotten, that the caves, in their own way, remember. And they remember everything. You know, even the most seasoned explorers sometimes wonder if there's something out there that never quite comes back. The Carlsbad Caverns have a way of holding on to secrets, and some of them are still whispering in the dark. There's a story about a hiker who vanished in 1987, and no one has found a trace of them. The park rangers say it's a closed trail, but the map still shows it. Maybe the trail is just as real as the silence that follows. The park has a way of making you feel like you're not alone. Sometimes, when you're deep in the caves, you swear you hear a voice, just a whisper, calling your name. But when you turn around, there's no one there. And then there's the radio. Some say it's just static, but others claim they've heard voices through it. A voice, low and mournful, repeating the same phrase over and over. Help me. The mystery isn't just about who disappeared or why. It's about what they left behind, and what or who is still waiting for someone to listen. You've heard the whispers of the Carlsbad Caverns, felt the weight of ancient silence, and wondered if the dark holds more than we can see. What if the stories we tell are just the echoes of something far older? Sometimes, the most haunting things are the ones we don't understand. The caverns breathe with a life of their own, cold, slow, and full of secrets that have waited centuries to be heard. Now, before we move on, I wonder what's the one thing you've heard that made you stop and think, just for a moment, that maybe the dark was listening back. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dip smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Stay warm, stay curious, and don't be afraid to let the silence speak. We'll be right back with another tale, but for now, let the caverns remind you some stories are never truly told. You've heard of the Grand Canyon, but have you ever wondered what lies beneath the desert? Carlsbad Caverns, nestled in New Mexico, is a place of wonder until you hear the whispers in the dark. These caverns are a natural wonder, but locals say they're also a place where the past refuses to stay buried. You can feel it when you step inside. The air is different, like it's holding its breath. Some say the caverns are haunted by the voices of those who once explored and never returned. Others believe the whispers are just the wind, but the stories are the same. No one can explain what they heard. But the real mystery isn't just the sounds. It's the silence that follows. The silence of the unexplained, the silence of those who vanished without a trace, and the silence that still lingers in the dark. You ever wonder how a place becomes haunted? Well, Carlsbad Caverns didn't start as a spooky spot. It began as a secret, ancient labyrinth of limestone, discovered by a man named Edward Ned Herndon in 1898. He was just a farmer, you know, chasing wild pigs through the desert. Ned didn't know it then, but he'd stumbled into something far older than his own lifetime. The caves had been a home to the Native American Guachas for thousands of years, and they left behind stories that still echo through the stone. The Guachos called the caves El Seal of the Sky because they believed the spirits of their ancestors lived there, guiding the living. Some say the caves were a sacred place where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin, almost non-existent. When the caves were finally opened to the public in 1910, the Guachos were already gone, but their stories remain. The first visitors heard whispers in the dark and saw shapes that vanished when the lights came on. And so, Carlsbad Caverns became more than just a natural wonder. It became a place where history and legend merged. A place where the past still breathes and the silence is louder than any scream. You remember the first time you heard the whisper, didn't you? It was just after dark, and the wind had died down, leaving an eerie silence that made your skin crawl. You thought it was the sound of your own breath, but no, it was something else entirely. The whisper came again, softer this time, like a child's voice calling from the deep. You told yourself it was just the echo of the wind, but your heart started to race. You could feel it in your bones. Something was watching. Then you saw it, a shadow moving where there was no light. It wasn't the shape of any animal or rock, but something wrong. It was there for a heartbeat, then gone, leaving you with the chill of something unseen pressing against your back. You turned back toward the entrance, but the path seemed to shift, the rocks rearranging themselves as if to block your way. That's when you realized you weren't alone in the cavern. Something had already been here, and it was waiting. You've heard the stories of the Carlsbad Caverns, but what about the ones that never made it out? A hiker vanished in 1958, leaving only a half-eaten sandwich and a trail of footprints that led nowhere. The last radio transmission was a whisper, "I'm not alone down here." Then silence. No more signals. The park rangers searched for weeks, but the cave system is a labyrinth. No one could have known where to look. Some say the caverns swallow things whole, people, stories, even time. Others claim the echo of that hiker's voice still lingers in the stone, a sound only the most attuned can hear. And now, decades later, the same trail is being retraced. The same footprints, the same silence. The same question, what happened to that hiker? And why does the caverns still remember? You've heard the whispers, but have you ever met someone who witnessed the silence? A local hiker once told me about a night when the caverns seemed to hold their breath. He said the air grew heavy, like it was holding in a secret too big to speak. Then, the silence turned into something alive, a presence that made his breath catch in his throat. He didn't stay long after that. Said the silence wasn't just an absence, it was a question, and the caverns weren't done asking. You might say it's just a story, but I've heard the same tale from 3 different people, and every one of them said the same thing. The silence didn't just happen, it waited. So the next time you hear that hiker's story, ask yourself, what if the caverns why to be heard? What if they're not trying to scare us but to remember ? We followed the trail of whispers into the heart of the caverns, where the air grew thin and the silence pressed in like a hand on your shoulder. The guide said it was all just echoes, but you could feel something watching. The first strange thing was the temperature. It dropped like a cold hand as we walked deeper, even though the sun still shone above. We joked about it, but the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Then we found the old map, faded, stained, and marked with strange symbols that no one could decipher. The guide said it was from a lost explorer, but the ink had bled through the paper as if something had tried to erase it. The last thing we saw was a set of footprints, fresh in the dust, leading straight into the unknown. They weren't ours, and they weren't from any of the guides. We left, but the caverns didn't let us go so easily. We came out with more questions than answers, and the silence followed us home. The caverns had whispered, but we still don't know if they were asking for help or warning us to stay away. You ever notice how some places hold secrets that just refuse to be told? The Carlsbad Caverns are one of those places, and the one thing that's never been explained, it's not the caves themselves, it's the silence. There's a moment in the tour right after the tour guide says this is where the lost hikers disappeared, and the silence just stops, like the caves are holding their breath. And then there's the sound. Some say they hear it when the tour is over, like a low, mournful hum, or the echo of a voice calling out. But when they turn around, there's nothing there. The caves have a story to tell, but they're not telling it to us. They're telling it to the silence, and that silence has been louder than any scream. You've heard the tales of the Carlsbad Caverns, but what about the stories the locals still tell? Some say the caves are more than just rock and stone, they're alive, and they remember. There's a legend about a lost hiker who vanished decades ago, and the caves still whisper his name. Some say the wind carries his voice through the tunnels, echoing like a warning. There are also whispers of a ghostly child, lost in the labyrinth of the caves, calling out for her mother. Some say she can be heard on certain nights, her voice rising from the depths. And then there are the theories. Some say the caves are just natural acoustics, others that they're a gateway to something older, something that has watched over the land for eons. But no matter what the truth is, one thing remains clear: the Carlsbad Caverns are not empty. They hold stories, they hold memories, and they hold silence that speaks louder than words. You know, sometimes the hardest part isn't finding the truth, it's letting go of the hope that it exists. The Carlsbad Caverns have a way of making you wonder if the silence is just that silent. The last radio transmission was cut off mid-sentence. "Something's wrong" was all they got before the signal died. No one knows if it was a breakdown, a cry for help, or the first whisper of a long, unanswered question. The park rangers say there's nothing to fear, but then again, they didn't hear the footsteps in the silence or the whispers in the stone. They didn't hear the voice that wasn't there at all. So here's the thing. The caves are full of stories, but some of them never end. And sometimes, the most haunting part isn't the ghost, it's the fact that the story still has a chapter left to write. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. Have you ever heard a silence so thick it feels like it's wrapped around your bones? These caverns don't just whisper, they hum with the memory of those who came before. What do you think they're trying to tell us, dear listener? Before we go on, let's take a moment to remember that the past is never truly gone. It lingers, just like the echo of a voice you've never heard. So, as we move on to our next tale, I'll leave you with this: sometimes the most terrifying thing we hear is the silence between the screens. You've heard the stories, but have you ever stood where the Stanley Hotel's ghosts still linger? It's not just a place, it's a living memory, steeped in history and haunted by the echoes of those who once called it home. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Built in 1909, the Stanley Hotel was a dream come true for its founder, Henry Stanley. But dreams, as we all know, can turn into nightmares, especially when the past refuses to stay buried. Now you might be thinking, haunted hotels are everywhere, but the Stanley Hotel is different. Its ghosts aren't just visitors, they're residents, still living out the lives they left behind. The rumors started in the 1960s after a writer named Stephen King stayed there and said the hotel had a presence, a feeling that it was watching you, waiting for you to leave. But the real mystery isn't just the ghosts, it's the people who stayed there, the lives that were lived and lost, and the secrets that still linger behind every creaking floorboard and echoing hallway. So, if you're ready to step into the Stanley Hotel, I suggest you bring your courage, your curiosity, and maybe a little flashlight. After all, the best stories are told in the dark. You might not know the Stanley Hotel's name, but you've probably heard the whispers. It's in the Rockies, high up, and it's got a story that started with a man named Henry Stanley, a British adventurer who thought he'd found the perfect place to build a hotel. Stanley wasn't just a man of ambition, he was a man of vision. He wanted the hotel to be more than a place to stay. He wanted it to be a beacon for the wealthy, a place where people could come to relax and enjoy the beauty of the Rockies. But Stanley wasn't the only one with a vision. His wife, Eleanor, had her own ideas. She wanted the hotel to be more than a place for the elite. She wanted it to be a refuge for people who needed a place to heal, to be safe, to be loved. Together, they built a place that was both grand and gentle, a place where the mountains seemed to listen and the snow whispered secrets. But even the best laid plans can be upended by time, greed, and the ghosts of the past. And so, the Stanley Hotel was born, not just as a place to stay, but as a place where dreams, regrets, and the unseen guests of the past would find a home. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. A faint chill, like the air had been pulled from the room, just before the lights flickered and the hallway doors creaked open. Then came the whispers, just above a whisper, like someone was speaking in a language you almost understood. You turned, but there was no one there, only the sound of a child's laughter echoing from the stairwell. The next morning, the caretaker found a child's toy in the elevator shaft, untouched, as if it had fallen from above, but no one had been in the building that night. And then, the first real sign. A message left on the desk of the front office, written in crayon, saying, "Please don't let them in." The words were smudged, like they had been wiped and redrawn. You tried to laugh it off, like a prank, but the weight of it lingered, like the scent of something old and forgotten that you couldn't quite place. And you wondered, as you left that night, if you had just said goodbye to something that had been waiting for you all along. You know, the Stanley Hotel isn't just a place of grandeur and nostalgia, it's also where a mystery began. In 1916, a woman named Mary Sutherland vanished without a trace, right in the heart of this very hotel. Her husband, a writer, claimed she was taken by a ghost, but no one believed him. Mary was a guest here, staying in room 401, the same room that's now known as the Haunted Room. She'd been writing a novel, and she left behind a journal filled with strange entries about a shadowy figure and a voice that called her name in the night. Her husband searched the hotel for days, asking everyone he could find. Some said she left, others said she was never here, but the hotel staff claimed to see her in the hallways whispering to herself and never again seen. Years later, a local historian uncovered a letter from Mary's husband, dated the day after her disappearance. He wrote, "I think she's still here, watching, waiting, and I fear she's not alone." That letter was never sent. It was left in the hotel's archives, a final whisper from a man who knew the truth. To this day, people say they hear a voice calling from room 401 and see a shadowed figure in the hallway. Some say it's Mary, still waiting for someone to listen. Others say it's a warning some things never leave the walls of a place like this. I was told to keep my eyes open, but I swear I saw them, 3 figures in the hallway, just standing there, like they were waiting for someone. The hotel had been empty for years, but the air felt heavy, like it held their breath. One of the guests, a retired teacher named Linger, said she heard laughter coming from the ballroom. She said it wasn't the kind of laughter that's just loud, it was like it was echoing through time, like it had been heard before and would be heard again. One night, a caretaker claimed he saw a woman in a white dress walking through the garden, her hands outstretched as if she were trying to reach for something or someone she couldn't find. And then there was the man who claimed to hear voices in the elevator. He said they were arguing about something he couldn't understand. He said the voices were coming from the walls like they were trapped and they wanted out. These aren't just stories. They're pieces of a puzzle we've only just begun to piece together. The Stanley Hotel isn't just haunted, it's remembering something we've forgotten. The investigators arrived with notebooks and curiosity, but what they found was far more than a hotel. It was a living, breathing echo of the past. They asked the staff, "Have you ever seen a ghost?" And the answer was always the same. They checked the rooms, the tunnels, the old staff quarters, and the archives. But the deeper they dug, the more the hotel seemed to resist them, like it had its own agenda. One staff member claimed to hear laughter in the early hours, only to find no one there. Another said the elevator would stop on the 12th floor, even though there was no 12th floor. The deeper they went, the more the hotel seemed to test them. It wasn't just haunted, it was trying to tell a story, one that only the most attentive would understand. You know how sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones with the loudest ghosts, but the ones that whisper just enough to make you wonder if you're being watched. The Stanley Hotel has that kind of silence, the kind that clings to the walls like dust. There's one thing about the Stanley Hotel that's always been a mystery, this one detail that no one can agree on, and no one can explain. It's not the ghosts, it's the way they seem to be waiting for something. It's not the ghost that's the mystery, it's the way the ghost seems to be waiting for someone. Waiting for a door to open, for a voice to call out, for a moment that never came. That's the thing that haunts the Stanley Hotel more than the ghosts themselves. So what do you think? Is it the hotel that's waiting, or is it the people who came before us? That's the one detail that has never been explained. And maybe that's the point. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? That the Stanley Hotel isn't just haunted, it's hosting something. And some say it's not just the ghosts of the past who have found a home here. Local legends say that the hotel's original owner, Wirt Herndon, made a pact with something ancient, a deal he never meant to keep. And now, the spirits are still waiting for their due. There are rumors, of course, that some guests never left, that their rooms still hold their things, their clothes, their unopened letters, and that the hotel keeps them, not out of malice, but out of some strange, ancient courtesy. But let's not forget, the Stanley isn't just a hotel. It's a story, a place where the past and present collide, and where the unseen guests still have a seat at the table. And maybe, just maybe, they're still waiting for you to join them. You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you expect. The Stanley Hotel, with its grandeur and history, is a treasure. But what about the places that don't get the attention? The ones that stay quiet, waiting for someone to listen. There's a room in the hotel, tucked away, that's never been fully explored. Rumors say it's where a missing woman was last seen. You can almost hear her footsteps if you pay attention. We've searched the hotel, the archives, the police reports. Nothing adds up. No closure, no answers. Just this feeling that someone, somewhere, is still waiting for someone to find them. And that's why we're still here. To listen, to remember, to wonder. Because sometimes, the truth is just out of reach, and that's what makes it so haunting. You know, sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what you see, but what you feel in the silence between the whispers. The Stanley Hotel doesn't just haunt the living, it haunts the memories of those who once called it home. And if you're ever lucky enough to stay there, remember some doors don't close on their own. Now, I wonder what secrets are waiting for you in the next story. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You've heard of the Stanley Hotel, haven't you? That grand old Colorado retreat where the snow never quite melts and the ghosts never quite leave. Built in 1909, it's a piece of history that's still alive in the bones of the place, like a story that's been passed down for generations, but never quite finished. People say that the hotel has a soul, one that lingers in the silence between the creaks of the floorboards and the echo of footsteps in the empty halls. And though it's a place of luxury now, there's something about it that feels like it's always waiting for someone to come back, maybe not as a guest, but as a memory. You ever heard of a hotel that was built on a graveyard? Well, the Stanley Hotel wasn't just built on a graveyard, it was built on a ghost town. Back in 1881, the town of Stanley was a booming silver mining hub. But when the mines ran dry, the town vanished overnight, leaving behind only the echoes of its people. When the Stanley Hotel was built in 1909, it was meant to be a luxury retreat for the wealthy. But the hotel's bones were still those of the old town, and the ghosts of its people clung to the walls like cobwebs. The hotel's original owners, the Stanleys, were a family of entrepreneurs with a taste for the dramatic. They had a reputation for hosting elaborate seances and even claiming to have communicated with the spirits of Stanley. But the real story of the Stanley Hotel begins when the hotel was taken over by the Kemper family. They were a different kind of family, more secretive, more haunted, and far more tied to the town's dark past. And that, dear friends, is how the Stanley Hotel became more than a hotel. It became a home for the unseen guests who had never left. You remember the first time you noticed the air felt different, like the hotel had a secret it wasn't telling you. A faint chill, not from the window, but from the walls themselves. It was during the quiet hours, when the rest of the world had gone to sleep, that the silence became too loud. Like the hotel was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. People started to notice things too. A door that wasn't closed, a room that had been empty the night before. The hotel was playing tricks, but on what? And why? And then, the first real sign, something that couldn't be ignored. A guest vanished, and no one could explain how. The hotel had started to show its true face. You know, the Stanley Hotel isn't just a place, it's a living memory. But what if that memory isn't just of the past, but of someone who never left? In 1987, a young man named Kevin Arnold vanished from his room on the 16th floor. He left behind his suitcase, his keys, and a note that read, "I have to go." His last known location was the hotel's famous elevator, where he had been watching the famous Stanley Hotel ghost, a man in a tuxedo who appears in the mirror. The hotel staff never saw him again. To this day, people say they hear his voice in the elevator, a quiet thank you echoing through the steel. Some say it's a warning, others say it's a goodbye. The hotel's ghosts are many, but the ones that linger the longest are the ones who never left. And sometimes they're the ones who were never there at all. I remember the first time I heard it, sitting in the lobby with the scent of old books and pine smoke in the air. A woman in the corner, her eyes wide, said, "I saw them just standing there, watching me." Another guest told me they saw a man in a tuxedo, leaning against the bar, smiling at no one. He vanished when the bartender turned around. No one else saw him, but the barkeep swore he was there. One night, a group of guests claimed they heard laughter coming from the hotel's rooftop. They said it was a sound that didn't belong to any human, like something ancient and forgotten was playing a cruel joke on them. And then there was the woman who said she saw a child in the hallway holding a lantern, and the light flickered like a heartbeat. When she ran to check, the hallway was empty, but the lantern was still there, sitting on the floor. These stories aren't just rumors. They're echoes of something that lingers, something that doesn't let go. And if you're ever here, remember this hotel doesn't just host guests. It hosts them and keeps them. We sent a team of investigators to the Stanley Hotel, armed with old maps and a healthy dose of skepticism. What we found was more than we expected, like a room where the light never quite fades. They noticed how the temperature dropped in certain spots, like a chill coming from the walls themselves. The air felt heavy, as if the past was pressing in. They found old guest logs with names that didn't match any records, and some entries that felt more like diary entries than hotel logs. The mystery deepened with every page. The deeper they dug, the more they realized the Stanley Hotel wasn't just haunted, it was holding secrets that had been buried for decades. What they uncovered wasn't just about ghosts, it was about people, choices, and the stories we leave behind, even when we're gone. You know, the thing that still haunts me about this place is not the ghost, not the screams, not the missing people, it's the silence. A silence so thick, it feels like it's holding its breath. They found a set of footprints in the snow outside the hotel, but no one knows where they led. They just stopped. Like the earth itself had swallowed them whole. The staff says they've heard the same thing over and over, voices, laughter, a child's giggle, but no one has ever seen anything. Just the sound of something not quite there. And then there's the radio. You know, the one that always crackles with static, like it's waiting for someone to tune in. But the station's long gone, and the dial never finds a signal. So, what do you think? Was it a prank? A prank gone too far? Or something more real? Because no one ever gets answers here. Not really. Some say the Stanley Hotel isn't just haunted by the past, it's haunted by the present. You've heard the stories of the writer who stayed there and never left, but what about the ones who never came at all? Local legends whisper that some guests never check in, but they still show up in the lobby, waiting for someone who never arrived. It's like the hotel has a memory of people who were never meant to stay. There's even a theory that the hotel's ghosts are just the echoes of the people who stayed here, like the writer, the honeymooners, the children who died in the fire. They're not ghosts, they're just the hotel remembering them. So when you walk through those doors, you might not just be staying at a hotel, you might be joining a conversation that's been going on for over a century. And sometimes, the hotel answers back. There's something about the Stanley Hotel that lingers, not just in the stories, but in the silence between them. You feel it in the way the wind whispers through the corridors, like it's trying to tell you something you're not ready to hear. Some say the ghosts here are just echoes of the past, but others swear they're still here, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth that was buried long ago. The mystery isn't just in the ghosts, it's in the people who came before us and the secrets they left behind. Some say the hotel holds more than just memories, but the truth. It's still waiting to be found. And so, dear listener, we return to the Stanley Hotel, not as a place of fear, but as a place of unanswered questions. A place where the past refuses to stay buried. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. The Stanley Hotel isn't just a building, it's a story that refuses to be forgotten. And as the lights dim and the silence stretches, you might just feel it, the weight of a presence, not of a ghost, but of a memory that lingers. So when you hear that faint whisper in the night, don't be surprised. You might be hearing the hotel telling its story, one ghost at a time. But remember, the Stanley Hotel isn't just haunted, it's haunted by those who lived, loved, and left their mark. And that's what makes it truly unforgettable. You ever heard of Hill House? It's not just a house. It's a place where the walls remember. They say the air smells like old roses and something else, something that doesn't belong. Built in the early 1900s by a man obsessed with the occult, it was meant to be a sanctuary. Instead, it became a prison for the souls it trapped. The locals whisper about the laughter that echoes through the halls, even when no one's there. Some say the house is cursed, others say it's just lonely. Either way, it's a place where the past refuses to stay buried, and the air is thick with secrets that haven't been told yet. So, what do you think? Is it just a house, or is it something more? Something that waits for the right person to come back and listen. You know, the Hill House wasn't always a haunted house. It started as a simple, sturdy home built in the 1880s by a man named William Henry Parsons, who was as eccentric as he was wealthy. Parsons wasn't just a builder, he was a poet, a painter, and a man obsessed with the idea of living architecture. He believed the house itself could be alive, and he built it with that very thought in mind. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. But Parsons wasn't alone in his vision. His wife, Eleanor, was his greatest collaborator, and together they filled the house with art, music, and an almost sacred reverence for the space. However, the house began to change. The walls, once warm and inviting, grew cold, and the music they once played became a haunting melody that echoed through the halls at night. It was said that the house itself became a character in their story, a place where love and madness intertwined, and where the lines between the real and the supernatural began to blur. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It wasn't loud or scary, just wrong. A flicker in the hallway light, like someone had turned it off and on again, but no one was there. Then there was the sound, a low hum, like a refrigerator in the attic. But it wasn't the fridge. It came and went, never quite matching the rhythm of anything else in the house. The wallpaper started peeling more, like it was being pulled away by invisible hands. You couldn't shake the feeling that the house was trying to tell you something, but you didn't know what. One night, you woke to the smell of roses, real roses, but no one had planted them. You checked the garden, and there were none, but the scent lingered, sweet and suffocating. By then, you knew it wasn't just a bad house. It was something else entirely. Something that had been waiting for you, maybe even for a long time. You ever wonder what it's like to be alone in a house that knows your name? That whispers your secrets back to you in the dark, like it's waiting for you to break. One night, the house didn't just whisper. It called. A voice, soft and familiar, came from the bedroom like it was calling her back to life. She ran, not out of fear, but out of a need to survive. The house was no longer a place. It was a prison, and she was its prisoner. They found her the next morning, her footprints leading into the hallway but no body. Just the echo of a voice, still calling. The house didn't take her, it just remembered. And now, it waits for the next one to come back. And if you're ever tempted to stay, just remember, some houses don't want you to leave. I remember the first time I heard about Hill House, it was from a neighbor who swore he saw a glowing light flickering behind the trees at midnight. He said it wasn't just the light, it was a heartbeat, like the house itself was alive. One woman claimed she heard laughter coming from the walls, but when she turned, there was no one there, just her own reflection in the mirror, smiling back at her with a strange, knowing look. Another visitor described the smell of burnt sugar and the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the halls, even though no one was there. She said the house was trying to tell her something she didn't want to hear. A man who lived there for months told me he never saw a ghost, but he did feel them, like the house was watching him, waiting for him to break. He said the walls were alive and they knew everything about him. And then there's the woman who said she saw the house move. Not just the trees or the sky, but the house itself. She said it shifted, like it was trying to escape something or someone. These stories don't just haunt Hill House, they haunt the people who tell them. And they keep telling them, like a lullaby that's never quite finished. We arrived at Hill House with a team of investigators, all of us feeling the weight of the air like we'd stepped into a living memory. The front door creaked open, and the silence inside was louder than any sound. The first thing we found was a ledger in the attic, filled with names and dates, some of them recent. We all exchanged glances, wondering if we were being watched or if time itself had stopped here. One of the investigators reported hearing a voice in the hallway calling their name. When they checked, there was no one there. We all felt the same chill, like we were being addressed by someone who knew us. We found a hidden door behind the study, leading to a basement that had been sealed for years. Inside, the air was thick, and the walls were covered in old newspaper clippings about disappearances that never made the news. The final clue came from a letter in the study, written by the last known resident. It spoke of a child who had vanished, and of a house that would never let go. We left with more questions than answers, and feeling that we had only just begun to understand. You ever notice how some details just linger, like a half-remembered dream? The one thing about Hill House that no one can agree on, not even the experts. It's not the creaks or the cold spots, it's something else entirely. It's the floorboards. Not the ones you see, but the ones you don't. Some say they shift when no one's looking, others insist they hum in the dead of night. But no one can explain why they're all different sizes, like someone built the house with a fever and a broken ruler. And then there's the smell, not the kind that lingers, but the kind that comes and goes. Some say it's the house itself, others say it's the ghosts. But no one can say for sure what it smells like, or if it smells at all. You think you've heard every story about Hill House? You haven't. The real mystery is the one that doesn't have a story, the one that's still waiting to be asked. And maybe it's not waiting for anyone. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the locals truly believe? Some say the house is cursed by a vengeful spirit, others whisper it's a gateway to another realm. There's a tale that the original owner, a wealthy widow, sealed the house with a spell after her husband died under mysterious circumstances. Some say she's still inside, waiting for someone to break the curse. Others claim the house is just a place where the living can see through the veil. It's said that those who enter without a purpose often come out changed or not at all. One local insists the house is a trap. He says the only way out is to find the hidden room and face whatever waits inside. But he's never returned since he tried. And then there are the children's stories. They say if you whisper the house's name at midnight, it will answer, but you have to be careful what you ask for. So what do you believe? That the house is a prison, a mirror, or something far more ancient and unknowable? The truth, like the house itself, is still standing waiting. There are still whispers in the wind, you know. Some say the house has eyes in the windows, watching, waiting for the right moments to speak again. The old caretaker's journal was lost, but the letters remain, letters he never sent, letters that never reached the world. Some say the house is still trying to tell its story, but no one knows where to begin. The silence is louder than any scream. You can't just walk away from a place like Hill House. It lingers like a memory you can't quite forget, even if you never lived it. And so, the mystery remains, waiting, breathing, watching. Just like the house itself. You walked the halls of Hill House, felt the weight of its secrets, and now you're left with the quiet and settling stillness. What do you think lingers in the corners of that place? The house doesn't just haunt the living, it haunts the memory. Do you ever feel the echo of a whisper, or the sense that someone is still watching? And when the lights go out, even in your own home, do you ever wonder if it's not the power, but something else that's gone dark? Remember, the best stories aren't always the ones you hear. Sometimes, they're the ones you feel in your bones long after the tale is done. Before we move on, take a moment. Let the silence settle. And remember, some houses are never truly empty. You ever heard of a ship that vanished in the night, leaving only whispers behind? The SS Mignon was no ordinary vessel. It was a steamship that sailed the dark waters of the Mississippi, and it vanished without a trace in 1912. They say the Mignon was packed with passengers, many of whom were never seen again. Some say it was a smuggling run gone wrong, others claim it was cursed. But the truth? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Now, this ship didn't just disappear, it left behind a trail of eerie stories. Some say the crew heard voices in the engine room, others heard the sound of a child crying in the dark. The locals called it the ghost ship of the Mississippi. Some say it's still out there, drifting through the dark waters, carrying the souls of those it claimed. So, what do you think? Was it a tragic accident, a haunted vessel, or something far more sinister? We'll be unraveling the secrets of the Mignon in the coming days. You know, the Mignon wasn't just any ship. It was a French luxury liner, built for the wealthy, and it sailed with a reputation for being more than a little unreliable. It was built in 1923, in the heart of the Roaring '20s, when the world was buzzing with ambition and the sea was a place of both escape and risk. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. But the Mignon wasn't just a vessel of luxury, it was also a place of secrets, where people went to escape their lives and sometimes never came back. And the people on board? They were a mix of the rich, the desperate, and the curious, some seeking escape, others seeking something far darker. So when the Mignon vanished, it wasn't just a ship lost at sea, it was a mystery wrapped in fog, and no one ever figured out what really happened. You remember the calm before the storm, don't you? The way the sky turned a sickly gray and the waves began to roll like the ocean was holding its breath. That's when the first whispers started, faint and far away, like someone was trying to tell us something we weren't ready to hear. The crew said it was just the weather, that the Mignon was built for storms. But I'll never forget the way the ship's bell rang twice, then once more like it was trying to say goodbye. And the wind, it carried a sound like weeping. The sailors began to vanish. Not in the way you'd expect, no bodies, no screams, just gone. And the ones who stayed started to change. They'd look at you like they knew something you didn't, like they were waiting for the moment when the sea would take them back. It wasn't just the sea that was wrong. The air felt heavy, like the weight of all the secrets the Mignon had swallowed. And I swear, sometimes I'd hear a voice just once calling my name from the depths. Not a scream, not a cry, but a whisper that felt like it came from the very bottom of the ocean. And then, one morning, the ship was gone. Just like that. No wreckage, no survivors. Only the sea, deeper than ever, and the memory of a ship that never should have been built. You ever think about how the sea can swallow a ship whole, like it's never been there? The Mignon vanished without a sound, just like that. You can almost hear the water whispering her name. The last radio transmission was a frantic, broken plea. We're going down. Help us. And then silence. No survivors, no wreckage, just a ghost ship, drifting in the dark. They found the captain's journal, half burned and waterlogged, with ink smudged by the sea. The last entry? I feel her eyes on me. She wants to come back. The Mignon wasn't just lost. She was lured, and she was waiting. Some say the sea remembers, and she never left the water, just the shore. Now, when the wind picks up and the fog rolls in, you can still hear her. A whisper, a sigh, a call. The Mignon is still out there, waiting for someone to listen. One woman claimed to see a figure in the mist, dressed in a 1920s flapper dress, humming a tune that sounded familiar, like a lullaby she'd heard as a child. She said the woman's eyes were empty, like looking into a dark well, and she never spoke, just floated just beyond reach, as if waiting for someone to remember her. It was said to be the sound of the lost crew playing their final game of cards, the laughter growing louder until it drowned out the waves, then fading into silence. Some said they saw a light on the ship's mast, flickering like a dying candle, and when they tried to approach, it vanished like smoke in the wind. One final witness described a sound like a child's voice calling from the water, a name she couldn't quite place, but it felt like it was meant for her. We began the investigation with old newspapers and brittle photographs, and what we found was more unsettling than we expected. The Mignon wasn't just a ship, it was a graveyard of secrets. One of the first clues was a letter from a passenger's niece, written decades after the ship vanished. She described a cabin that never locked, and a sound like a child's laughter echoing through the night. We found a logbook that had been altered, pages missing, entries redacted. But there was one line that stood out. The sea was too quiet, too still, like it was waiting. And then there were the whispers of a child who never left the ship, of a mother who vanished without a trace, of a captain who never returned. The asterisk mignon asterisk was more than a ghost. It was a promise of silence. We didn't find answers, but we found a story that refused to be forgotten. And sometimes, that's the scariest thing of all. You ever wonder what happens when a ship vanishes and no one knows why? The asterisk mignon asterisk was just like that, gone, and no one could say for sure what became of it. Not even the crew. They found the wreckage years later, but not a single piece of the ship matched the records. It was as if the asterisk mignon asterisk had been rebuilt in the ocean's mind, then torn apart again. The only thing that remains is the mystery and the whisper that maybe the asterisk mignon asterisk never left the water at all. Some say the ship still drifts through the deep, carrying the voices of those who were never meant to be lost. And that, dear friends, is the one detail that has never been explained. Some say the SS asterisk mignon asterisk wasn't just a ship, it was a floating shrine, a place where the desperate and the damned met. You ever heard the tale of the woman who swore she saw her own reflection in the water, only to vanish the next morning? Others claim the ship's ghost is still here, in the fog, in the sound of the waves waiting for someone to ask the wrong question. You ever wonder what happens when you're lost at sea, and the sea doesn't let you go? And yet, the locals still whisper. They say the wind carries the voices of the asterisk mignon asterisk S crew, and the tide still remembers their names. You ever wonder if the sea's just waiting for someone to listen? So next time you're near the coast, listen closely. You might hear the asterisk mignon asterisk S story if you know where to look. And if you do, you might just find out what happened to those poor souls who vanished with the ship. You see, the mignon never really left the water. It just kept floating, waiting, like a ghost in the tide. No one knows where it went, and no one wants to find out. There are whispers of a storm that never happened, of a captain who never returned, and of a crew that vanished like smoke in the dark. But the truth, it's still under the waves, waiting for someone brave enough to look. Sometimes, the best stories aren't the ones that end. They're the ones that keep going, drifting on the surface of the water, just out of reach, like a promise that the past will never stay buried. So, what do you think? Did the mignon sink, or did it just disappear? And if it's still out there, what do you suppose it's waiting for? Or something else entirely? That's the thing about the mignon, it doesn't just haunt the sea. It haunts the hearts of those who remember and the dreams of those who never knew it existed. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. The SS asterisk mignon asterisk isn't just a ship, it's a memory, a whisper in the dark, waiting for someone to listen. What if the sea isn't just taking lives, but remembering them? Sometimes, the truth isn't found in the wreckage, it's found in the silence that follows. So, if you're ever in the mood for a story that lingers, one that leaves you wondering just a little longer, remember the asterisk mignon asterisk. She's still out there, somewhere, and if you ever hear a distant bell, or feel a chill in the air when no one's around, you might just be hearing her call. You've heard of castles with ghosts, but Elsinore? That's a place where the air itself holds secrets. It's not just a castle, it's a story, wrapped in stone and silence. Built in the 12th century, it's the kind of place that whispers to those who listen. The locals say the wind carries voices through the halls, and the moat is more than just water, it's a mirror to the past. Some say the echoes come from a queen who ruled with fire and fury. Others whisper of a curse that binds the castle to the fate of every soul who walks its corridors. But one thing is certain, no one leaves Elsinore unchanged. There are those who claim to hear the voices in the night, a woman's laughter, a child's cry, or the sound of footsteps that vanish before they reach the door. But you don't have to believe them, you just have to listen. So, what do you think? Is Elsinore just a place, or is it a living memory? I'll tell you more about the voices that haunt it, but first, let me set the scene because some stories begin with a whisper. Now, let me take you back to the year 1589, when Elsinore Castle was still a bustling seat of power. King Christian Roman IV had just commissioned its grandest renovations, and the walls were alive with the clatter of hammers and the laughter of craftsmen. But there was one man who never laughed. His name was Hans Christian, a master stonemason with a reputation for both brilliance and madness. He had a quiet rage that simmered beneath his every word. One night, he vanished without a trace. The workers found his tools and a shattered mirror in the courtyard, but no body. The whispers grew louder, and the castle's foundation began to crack under the weight of its own secrets. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dov smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. By the time the castle was finished, the whispers had become a warning. Elsinore was no longer just a palace, it was a tomb, and the walls had learned to speak. You remember the first time you heard it, a soft sigh, like a breath held too long. It came from the east wing, where the roses had long since withered and the air smelled of dust and forgotten vows. The sound wasn't loud, but it wasn't meant to be. It was a whisper that lingered, like a secret the walls had been keeping for centuries. You thought it was the wind, but the wind doesn't speak in whispers. You tried to laugh it off, to tell yourself it was just the old house, just the ghosts of the past. But the whispers grew louder, and the silence between them felt heavier than ever. And then you heard it again, but this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a name. A voice you didn't recognize, but one that felt like it had been waiting for you all along. You remember the hush that fell over Elsinore the night the last light went out. It wasn't the wind, it was something else, something that had been waiting. The caretaker's daughter, Clara, had been the last to leave the east wing. She said she heard it, a whisper, but not from the walls. It was coming from the mirror. They found her later. Not in the hallway, not in the room just outside the castle gates, her hand clutching a piece of the mirror, as if she had been trying to hold on to something that had already slipped away. No one has dared return to the east wing since, but sometimes, in the dead of night, the walls still whisper, not to the living, only to those who were never meant to hear. One woman swore she heard the castle's stone walls breathe. She said the sound was like a slow, wet sigh echoing through the halls at midnight, as if the place itself was trying to warn her. Another claimed to see a figure in the garden, draped in a long, tattered gown, standing motionless beneath the ancient oak tree, never moving, never speaking, just watching. A local historian said the castle was built on the bones of a forgotten village. They whispered that the stones hold the memories of the lost, and that the wind carries their sorrow through the cracks. Some say the whispers are not warnings, but lullabies. They say they can hear the voices of children, laughing and crying, playing in the halls long after the day has ended. And then there's the one who never left. She said she found a room no one else could find, and when she opened the door, the silence inside was louder than any sound. We began our investigation with a simple question. What if the whispers were not just echoes of the past, but a language we had yet to understand? The team set up microphones, cameras, and journals ready to listen for the voices that had lingered for centuries. The first night was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the faint creak of floorboards and the whisper of wind through the broken window. But the next night, we heard it, a voice, low and trembling, repeating the same word over and over, return. We found old records hidden in the library, sealed in a box with a wax imprint of the castle's crest. They spoke of a betrayal, a secret buried beneath the foundation. The whispers, we realized, might not be asking to be heard, they might be warning us not to listen. As the days passed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to follow us, as if the walls were no longer just stone, but a living, breathing entity with a story that had waited too long to be told. You've heard the whispers, felt the chill, but there's one thing that's always left you wondering: why did the maid never return from the East Wing? Every guidebook says she vanished in 1592, but no one ever found her dress, her diary, or the letters she promised to send home. What if the castle isn't just haunted by the past, it's haunted by a secret that's never been told? And that's the one detail that's never been explained. Just a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the hall, and a question that lingers like the scent of old perfume. Some say the whispers aren't just wind, but voices from the past, those who once lived here, now trapped between the stones. Have you ever heard a name in the silence, just before the darkness takes hold? The oldest tales tell of a woman who fell in love with a man who couldn't return her affections. He left, and she followed, only to be trapped in the walls where her love still echoes. There are those who believe the castle's walls remember every secret, every betrayal, every sorrow. And some say they still listen, waiting for the right moment to speak. Even today, locals tell stories of footsteps in empty rooms and voices calling from the deep. They say the castle is still waiting for someone to finally listen. So many years have passed, yet the echoes still return. You've heard the whispers, felt the cold, seen the flicker of a ghostly light. But what if the truth is buried deeper than the castle's foundations? The local historian, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and a sharp mind, still refuses to give up. She's spent decades chasing leads, but every thread unravels into silence. The most recent clue? A letter, written in a shaky hand, found in the castle's old well. It speaks of a hidden room, a secret passage, and a name that doesn't match any record. The police say it's a hoax. The historians say it's a mistake. But you know, sometimes the truth is just waiting for the right eyes to find it. And so, the mystery lingers, not as a tale to be told, but as a question that still waits for an answer. What will you do when the whispering walls call your name? You've felt the weight of a story, haven't you? Like the walls here are not just stone, but memory. A whisper in the dark, a sigh in the wind, a ghost of a life once lived. Sometimes, the scariest thing is not what you see, but what you feel. The cold spot in your back, the silence that stretches too long, the sense that you're not alone. But don't worry, dear listener, there's more where this came from. More ghosts, more secrets, more stories that will curl around your heart like a cold draft in the night. So take a deep breath and let the silence settle. Because sometimes, the best stories are the ones that leave you wondering, not screaming. You've heard of haunted castles and cursed forests, but have you ever heard of a cathedral that whispers in the dark? Elgin Cathedral, nestled in the heart of Scotland, has a reputation that's as old as the stones themselves. Built over 1,000 years ago, this place was once a center of worship, learning, and power. But over time, the echoes of its past have grown louder and the silence has become a kind of scream. Some say it's the prayers of the faithful trapped in the stone. Others insist it's the anguished cries of those who died in its shadow. And some say it's something far older, something that listens and waits. But what if the real mystery isn't the sound? It's the silence. What if the cathedral isn't screaming, but waiting for someone to listen? You've heard the whispers of Elgin Cathedral, but have you ever wondered how it all began? In 1220, a young monk named Brother Alan stumbled upon a secret passage beneath the nave, and that's where the trouble started. Brother Alan wasn't just curious, he was desperate. He had been accused of stealing sacred relics from the chapel, and this passage was his only hope of escape, or so he thought. What he found inside was not a way out, but a door to something far older, something that had been watching the cathedral for centuries, and it wasn't pleased to see a monk trespassing in its domain. The first scream came that night, echoing through the stone like a warning. The monks thought it was the wind, but they were wrong. Something had awakened, and it had a taste for the blood of the living. From that night on, the cathedral became a place of fear. The screams never stopped, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe, as if the stone had finally found a voice after centuries of silence. You remember the first time you heard it, don't you? A whisper in the wind, a sigh from the stone, something that didn't belong to the world we know. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't meant to be. A sound like a child's cry, or maybe a mother's lullaby, something old and lonely that clung to the air like a ghost in the mist. They said it was the voices of the dead trapped between the stones, unable to move on. But some said it was something else, something that had been here long before the cathedral was built. And then came the visitors. People who came to listen, to feel, to hear what they couldn't explain. Some left changed, others never returned. You've heard the stories, but you've never really listened. That's why you're here, isn't it? To find out what it means, to understand what it feels like to hear something that wasn't meant for you. You remember the silence before the scream, don't you? It wasn't just the wind, it was something else, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dove smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Then it came, a sound like a child's cry, but deeper, like the bones of the building were groaning in pain. No one could say where it came from, only that it stopped the world. They never found the killer, but the cathedral's bells began to ring at night, not in time with the hours, but in perfect harmony with the sound that had once come from the walls. And to this day, if you listen closely, you can still hear the boy's cry, faint but clear, echoing through the stones like a whisper from the past. I remember the first time I heard it. The sound was like a child's whimper caught in a storm. You've heard those stories, haven't you? Of voices that whisper through stone, like secrets buried with the dead. One woman said she heard the screams at midnight, right where the old monks once prayed. She said it was like the walls were alive, crying out in a language she didn't understand. Others claim the screams come in waves, like a tide, rising and falling with the wind. Some say it's the sound of a woman's voice, others say it's a man, but no one can agree on the words. There's even a local legend that the walls weep when the moon is full, and that the cries can be heard from miles away, like the echo of a long-forgotten prayer. Some say the screams are the voice of a woman who was buried alive, her final cry trapped in the stone. Others say it's just the wind, but I've heard it myself, and I know it's not just the wind. We began our investigation by walking the length of the cathedral, where the air feels heavier, as if it holds the weight of centuries. You can almost hear the echoes of voices that never left. The first clue came when the tour guide, a soft-spoken man with a weathered face, whispered that the walls once echoed with the cries of prisoners during the Reformation. You can almost imagine the sound, lingering in the silence. Then, we found a hidden passage behind a loose brick, leading into a small, damp chamber with a single, rusted door. It felt like we were stepping into a memory that had been locked away for centuries. Inside, we found a small, hand-carved wooden box filled with old letters and a faded portrait of a woman with wide, haunted eyes. You can almost feel the sorrow in her gaze, as if she were still waiting for someone to come back. The final clue was a journal entry, written in a trembling hand, describing a woman who had been imprisoned here. She was never seen again, and the walls, it seems, still remember her screams. You know, the thing that haunts me most about Elgin Cathedral isn't the whispers or the cold, it's the one detail that's never been explained. The one thing that just disappears. It's not the tomb itself, but what's inside it. No records, no names, no grave markers, just silence. A void where a person should be, and no one has ever been able to find it. They say the cathedral has always had its secrets. But this one, it's like the walls are holding their breath, waiting for someone to ask the right question. And here's the thing, no one has ever dared to open that tomb. Not even the historians. Maybe it's not the ghosts we should be afraid of. Maybe it's the silence. So the next time you walk through those ancient doors, remember some stories are too deep to be told, and some secrets are too heavy to carry. You've heard the whispers, but what do the locals truly say? Some claim the stones themselves are the mourners, not the ghosts. Others insist it's the wind, how it howls through the arches like a child in distress. One old man I spoke to once said the walls are crying out for the souls they've swallowed. He told me he's heard them in the night, echoing through the halls like a lullaby gone wrong. There's even a story about a priest who tried to silence the voices. He went into the crypt one night and came out with a look of pure terror. He said the walls were speaking in a language he couldn't understand. And then there's the theory that the cathedral is just a place where the real horror lives in the silence between the screams. That the walls don't scream, they wait. And still, the questions remain. Why did the bells stop on that night? What voice called from the stones? No one has ever found the body, and no one has ever heard the scream again. The archivists say it was a trick of the wind, the echo of a distant train, but the locals whisper that the sound came from the heart of the stone itself, like the cathedral was alive, and it had something to say. Some say the scream was the last cry of a woman who died in the cathedral, a bride who vanished on her wedding day. Others say it was a child who never made it home from a Sunday school trip. No one has ever found the body, and no one has ever heard the scream again. But if you're ever in Elgin, and you hear something in the stones, don't look up. Look down, and listen. As the last echoes of the cathedral's sorrow fade, I find myself wondering, what if the walls don't just remember, but also whisper? What if they're still waiting for someone to listen? You might think the silence now is the end of the story, but sometimes the most haunting silence is the one that holds the greatest mystery. And if you ever find yourself near Elgin, I'd suggest you walk the halls with more than just a flashlight. Sometimes you need to carry a listener with you. But until then, I'll leave you with this. The walls may be quiet now, but they're not done speaking. So, dear listener, as you leave this tale behind, I hope you'll carry its chill with you. For sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones that refuse to let you go. You've heard the stories, haven't you, of ship that vanished without a trace, leaving only whispers and waves that seem to remember. The Mignon was a luxury liner, afloat in the 1930s, but it never made it past the Atlantic. One night, it just disappeared, like it was never there at all. Now, decades later, the waters where it vanished still seem to hum with a strange, low sound like a lullaby for the lost. And those who say they've seen it, well, they're not exactly the kind of people you expect to be telling stories over a cup of tea. So, why do you think the Mignon vanished? Was it fate, or something darker? I'd love to hear your theories. So, the Mignon wasn't just any ship. It was a luxury liner, a floating palace on the river, built for the wealthy and the elite. You ever heard of the Mignon? It was like a cruise ship, but in the 19th century, sailing the Mississippi with all the grandeur you'd expect from a French chateau. The Mignon was owned by a wealthy New Orleans businessman named Pierre Leclerc, a man with a taste for the finer things and a reputation for being a bit eccentric. He didn't just want to transport people, he wanted to transport them in style, with music, wine, and a touch of mystery. The last known voyage of the Mignon was in 1867, during the height of the Civil War, when the river was both a lifeline and a battlefield. It was said to have carried supplies, but also a few more questionable cargo. Some say it was never seen again, others say it was sunk by Union forces. And that's where the mystery begins. Who was on that last voyage? What happened to the Mignon? And why, to this day, do some say they hear the sound of a distant horn, faint but unmistakable, coming from the river at midnight? You remember the sky that day, don't you? The way the clouds hung low and heavy, like they were holding their breath. It was the kind of weather that makes you think the world is holding its own breath. The Mignon left port early, just after dawn, with a full hold of passengers and cargo. The captain said it was a routine voyage, but you could tell he was watching the sky like it was watching him back. They checked the logs, the weather reports, even the old charts. Nothing had changed. The asterisk mignon asterisk had just vanished, like it had never been there at all. And yet, the sea kept moving, the sky kept darkening, and the silence between the waves grew louder. It was as if the asterisk mignon asterisk had never left, and the world had simply forgotten to say goodbye. You remember the last time the asterisk mignon asterisk set sail, don't you? The crew was full, the sky was clear, and the harbor was quiet. But then silence. No distress call, no bodies, just nothing. The captain's log was last updated on the day they vanished. The final entry? The sea is calm, the stars are bright, and the wind is at our backs. I feel watched. That's all. No more, no less. The Coast Guard searched for days. They found no wreckage, no bodies, no trace of the ship. Only a single piece of driftwood, covered in barnacles, floating near where the asterisk mignon asterisk last made port. Some say the asterisk mignon asterisk was cursed. Others whisper that the crew was lured by a ghostly siren, or that they were taken by the sea itself, hungry for their souls. But I've always wondered, what if they weren't taken at all? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Maybe they were never on the ship at all. Maybe they were always here, watching, waiting. And maybe the sea just let them go. I've spoken with several folks who claim to have seen the asterisk mignon asterisk-s ghost, but none of them agree on what exactly they saw. One woman swore she saw a ghostly ship in the fog, just like the one in her dreams. Another man said he saw the ship's lights flickering in the distance, but when he tried to get closer, the lights vanished like they were never there. He said it felt like the ship was watching him. Some say the asterisk mignon asterisk-s ghost only appears to those who are lost or searching for something. It's said to lead them to the place they've been longing for or to their doom. One final witness, a woman who claims to have been aboard the asterisk mignon asterisk during its last voyage, said the ship felt like it was being pulled under by something invisible. She said the crew didn't even know they were sinking. The investigation began with a single, unmarked crate found in the cargo hold of a fishing vessel, its contents more than a little strange. It held a stack of yellow letters, sealed with wax and stamped with the ship's name, but no one could say where they'd come from. The letters spoke of a voyage that never happened, a ship that vanished without a trace. They were written in a hurried hand, filled with fear and desperation, as if the writer knew something terrible was coming. The more they dug, the stranger it got. Old sailors spoke of a phantom figure that appeared in the fog, of a voice calling from the sea, and of a curse that couldn't be broken, not even by the strongest of men. Then came the artifacts, old compasses that pointed south no matter the direction, a rusted anchor that never sank, and a watch that always stopped at 3:47 a.m. The asterisk mignon asterisk wasn't just lost, it was being watched. The case grew colder with every clue, and the deeper they went, the more they realized the asterisk mignon asterisk wasn't just a ship, it was a story, a memory, a warning, and something that still waited in the dark for someone to listen. You know, the one thing that really haunts me about the asterisk mignon asterisk isn't the screams, or the cold, or even the missing bodies. It's the silence. No radio static, no distress calls, just nothing. Every report says the ship vanished without a sound. No sirens, no flares, just a radio that went dead and a compass that spun like it was trying to scream. Some say the ship was pulled under by a giant whirlpool. Others say it was swallowed by the sea itself. But no one knows why the radio stayed quiet. That's the real mystery. And here's the thing. No one has ever found a single piece of the asterisk mignon asterisk. Not the engine, not the hull, not even a bottle of wine. Just silence. You've heard the names, but do you know the faces? Some say the SS asterisk mignon asterisk was never a ship at all, but a ghost ship that appeared in the fog like a mirage, only to vanish before the eyes of those who dared chase it. Others whisper that the asterisk mignon asterisk was a smuggling vessel, a place where secrets were traded as freely as cargo, and where the lives of those aboard were lost in the silence of the deep. Some say the ship was cursed, that it was built on the bones of a drowned sailor, and that its last voyage ended in a storm that swallowed it whole, leaving only whispers and a single bottle adrift in the bay. And then there are those who say the asterisk mignon asterisk never left the port at all, it was never real. Only a story passed down, a warning, a memory that lingers in the hearts of those who remember. So what do you believe? That the asterisk mignon asterisk was real, or that it was a story told to keep the dark from coming too close? You might think the story ends here, but sometimes the sea has a way of keeping its secrets. The asterisk mignon asterisk vanished in 1942, but its name lingers in the whispers of the coast. No bodies were ever found, no wreckage, just the silence of the deep. And the locals, they still talk about the fog that never lifts, the lights that appear in the dark. The Coast Guard claims it was a storm, but the storm didn't come, and the *Mignon* never left port. So what do you think it is now? A ghost, or just a memory the sea won't let go? Maybe the mystery isn't about the ship, but the people who waited, who searched, who never gave up. And maybe that's what haunts the coast more than the *Mignon* itself. You've followed the Mignon's trail through time, through memory, through the hush of the sea. But sometimes, the silence is the loudest voice. The ocean never forgets. It carries stories in its waves and its currents in the way it whispers to the shore at midnight. And if you're ever in the mood for a story that lingers, a tale that lingers longer than the last breath of a ghost, you know where to find me. Until then, I'll leave you with the sound of waves and the feeling that the sea still remembers. You've heard the whispers of Elgin Cathedral, haven't you? A place where stone and silence conspire to hold a secret that's been echoing for centuries. It's not just a church, it's a living memory. Nestled in the heart of Scotland, it stands like a forgotten sentinel, its walls bearing the weight of history, war, and the ghosts of those who once prayed there. They say the walls don't just hold stories, they scream. A sound that's never been explained, a voice that haunts the echoes of its ancient halls. But what could have caused such a cry? A ghost? A chaos? Or perhaps, a secret that's never been laid to rest? As we step into the hush of this place, you might ask yourself, what exactly are you listening for? And what will you hear when the silence finally breaks? You know, the cathedral's story starts not with ghosts, but with a man named Bishop William Elgin. He was a powerful figure in the 12th century, and he built this place with his own hands and his own ambitions. He didn't just build a church, he built a monument to his own legacy, and that legacy was built on blood. The Elgin family had a long history of violence and political intrigue, and William wasn't above using his influence to silence rivals. But even the most powerful men can't outrun the weight of their sins. William died in 1207, and his legacy was left to rot in the shadows of the very place he built to immortalize himself. So when you hear the screaming walls, maybe you're not just hearing the past. Maybe you're hearing the echoes of man who built a cathedral, but never a home for his soul. You remember the first time you heard it, don't you? That sound, like a whisper just out of reach, like the wind trying to say something it shouldn't. It wasn't loud, not really, but it was there, like the walls were breathing, or maybe the stones were trying to remember something they were never meant to forget. And then it stopped, left you wondering if you imagined it, or if the stones were finally speaking after all these centuries. You might have laughed it off, like the old stories you heard as a child. But something about that sound, something about the way the walls seemed to hold their breath, left you with a strange, quiet certainty. You didn't know it yet, but that sound was only the beginning, and the walls were waiting for you to listen. You know, the real horror isn't always in the ghost, it's in the silence. One night, a young woman named linger was said to vanish from the cathedral's shadowed cloisters, leaving only her scarf behind, tangled in the ivy. The monks claimed she was lost in prayer, but the bells never rang that night. Some say the stones remember her, and her voice still echoes in the silence between the chimes. The last anyone saw of her was her reflection in the stained glass window, her face frozen in fear, as if the glass itself had turned against her. To this day, the cathedral's walls still seem to hold her breath. Some say the wind carries her name in the echo, and the stones remember every prayer she never finished. And if you listen closely, just before the bells chime, you might hear her still singing, still screaming, still asking for someone to find her. I've spoken to a few locals who swear they've heard the walls weep at night. One old woman said she'd wake up to the sound of a child's voice calling her name, only to find the room empty and the door locked from the inside. Another man said he was walking the path near the cathedral one evening and heard a voice behind him. He turned, but there was no one there, just the wind howling through the stone arches like a banshee. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a woman who said she heard a child laughing inside the cathedral during a storm. When she went to investigate, the sound stopped, and the silence that followed was louder than any noise. And then there's the story of a man who said he saw a ghostly procession of figures walking the same path every night. He described them as solemn, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and moving like they were carrying something heavy. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot 5 smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. These stories are just spooky, they're a way for the past to speak, even if only through the whispers of stone and wind. What do you think they're trying to tell us? We started by walking the same path the monks did centuries ago, just to get a feel for the rhythm of the place. It's funny, really, how silence can be louder than any scream. The first thing we noticed was how the air felt different in the shadow of the cathedral, thicker, heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then we found the hidden chamber beneath the floor, a place that had been sealed for centuries. It was like stepping into a forgotten memory, still warm with echoes of the past. The most unsettling thing wasn't what we found, it was what we didn't. The silence, the absence of time, the way the walls seemed to watch us, like they were waiting for something. And then, in the final hours, we heard it again, the whisper, the echo, the sound that made us all turn, even though there was no one else in the room. You know, the thing that still haunts me about Elgin Cathedral isn't the whispers or the cold. It's the one detail that has never been explained. The one thing that no one can tell you, not even the oldest locals. It's not a symbol, not a name, not even a mark of a weapon. It's something else entirely. Something that was never meant to be found. And yet, it's there, just waiting for someone to look closely enough. They say it's a warning, a message left behind by someone who knew the cathedral's secrets and the cost of uncovering them. But no one knows who left it or why they chose that spot or what it means. So I wonder, dear listener, what would you do if you found something like that? Would you take it home, leave it there? Or would you, like me, spend the rest of your life trying to figure out what it was and why it was never meant to be found? You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the walls of Elgin Cathedral don't just hold stone, they hold sorrow. Some say the stones are alive and they remember. The locals say the cathedral has seen more than its share of tragedy. A bishop's betrayal, a noblewoman's secret, and a child's cry that never faded. They don't know what they're looking for, but they know it's there. There's a theory, of course no one wants to admit it, but it's there. What if the cathedral is just listening? Not to the living, but to the dead. Not to hear them, but to remember. And then there are the ones who say the screams aren't from the past. That the cathedral is still waiting for someone to come and tell it their story. That it's not just haunted, it's hungry. You know, sometimes the truth is just too heavy to carry, and some mysteries, like Elgin Cathedral, have been left to rot in the shadows unanswered. Archaeologists say they found the bones of a young woman near the crypt, but no one knows who she was or why she was there. The cathedral's silence feels like a veil over a secret that's too deep to dig up. You've heard the echoes of a cathedral's sorrow, but have you ever wondered what it's like to be the stone, to feel the weight of centuries, to hear the voices of the lost still whispering through the cracks of time? Imagine standing in that silence, not as a visitor, but as part of the cathedral itself, listening, waiting, remembering. And when the last bell tolls and the final light fades, do the walls ever truly fall silent? Or do they just wait for the next soul to come along and listen for the sound of a heart that's still beating in the dark? Well, I think I'll leave you with that thought. But don't worry, we've got more tales to share. Just remember, some stories are best told when the lights are low and the fire is warm. You've heard of castles, you've heard of haunted mansions, but have you ever heard of a place where the walls themselves seem to moan? Dunfermline Abbey, Scotland, is that place. A crumbling relic of the Middle Ages, it's said to echo with whispers that have no source. Built in the 12th century by King David I, this place was a center of power, faith, and blood. But the stones remember more than just history, they remember the screams. Now, centuries later, the abbey stands in silence, but the air feels heavy, as though the weight of centuries is pressing down on it. You can almost hear it, the faintest sound, a whisper, a moan, a sigh. And if you're ever lucky enough to hear it, the abbey will not let you go easily. It's not just a place, it's a living memory, a ghost that clings to the walls, waiting for someone to listen. You know, back in the 12th century, Dunfermline Abbey wasn't just a place of prayer, it was a political chessboard. King David I had a vision, and he built this abbey with stone and ambition, but also with a heavy hand. The abbey housed not just monks, but also the royal family. Imagine a place where kings and queens walked, their footsteps echoing through the halls. It was a place of power, and also of secrets. But the abbey's history is not just about kings. It also held the bones of those who were buried here, and some say their whispers still linger in the stone. The abbey saw many deaths of monks, of nobles, and of the innocent. Some say the walls remember every cry, every prayer, every moment that shaped this place. And then there are the stories of wails that echo through the night, of voices calling out from the past. Some say the abbey is still alive, and its walls are just waiting to tell their tale. You know how sometimes, even in the quietest corners of the world, a sound slips through the cracks like a whisper from a long-lost friend? Well, the first thing people noticed at Dunfermline Abbey wasn't a ghost, but a sound. A low, mournful wail, like a child crying in the dark. It started at dusk, just as the last light faded from the sky. Some said it was the wind, others claimed it was the abbey itself, trying to speak. But no one could say for sure. The sound was too deliberate, too human. One night, a caretaker said he heard it clearly like a woman's voice calling out his name. He ran to the source, only to find the echo of his own voice bouncing back at him. The walls were alive, and they had something to say. And then, just as the sun rose, the sound stopped. No one knew why, but the silence left a different kind of chill, one that lingered long after the last note had faded. You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you expect. Dunfermline Abbey is old, yes, but it's the silence that gets to you. You can hear the stones whispering, but not the people who once lived here. There was a girl named Margaret, just 16, who vanished without a trace in 1782. No one knows if she ran, was taken, or something else happened. The abbey held her, and she never left. The caretaker found her locket, half buried in the garden, with her initials engraved on the back. But it was cold to the touch, and the metal was tarnished as if it had been there for centuries. Some say she was taken by the abbey's dark past, by the ghosts of those who died in its walls. Others say she was never there at all, but the silence says otherwise. And so, the walls still wail, not with sound, but with memory. You can feel it in the air, like a breath held too long. Margaret's story isn't over, it's just waiting for someone to listen. I've spoken with a few locals who swear they heard the wails at night. One man told me he'd been out for a walk, and the sound just came out of the walls like a child crying. You ever heard a sound like that in the middle of the woods? It's not just noise, it's a memory. Another woman said she was staying in a nearby cottage and woke up to the sound of sobbing. She checked the hallway, found no one, but the walls were damp with something she couldn't explain. It was as if the abbey had reached out through the stone. One of the monks, a quiet man named Brother Alistair, wrote in his journal about the walls weeping. He said the sound came at dawn, and it wasn't just the wind. He believed it was the abbey itself, remembering its own past. Do you think places can remember? And then there was the gardener, a man named Tom, who said the walls didn't just cry, they whispered. He said he could hear voices, not just one, but many, talking in a language he didn't understand. It wasn't fear that made him leave, it was the feeling that he was being watched. These aren't just stories, they're echoes, and if you listen closely, I think you might hear them too. But I'll warn you, once you hear the wails of Dunfermline Abbey, they never quite stop. We arrive at Dunfermline Abbey just after dawn, the sky a bruised purple, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient stone. The abbey loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the mist, as if the very ground refused to let it go. The first thing we noticed was the silence, so thick, so complete. It felt like the abbey was holding its breath. No birds, no wind, just the sound of our own footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. We found the first clue in the scriptorium, a faded journal entry from the 16th century, scrawled in shaky handwriting. It spoke of a nun who vanished without a sound, leaving only her rosary behind. Then, in the crypt, we found something even stranger, a set of footprints in the dust leading straight to the altar, as if someone had been standing there, waiting for us. We didn't know it yet, but the abbey had more than just secrets to tell. It had a story that refused to stay buried. You know, the one thing that never makes sense is the sound. It's not just a whisper, it's not just a cry. It's like a scream trapped in the stones, like someone is trying to tell us something, but we just can't hear them. They say the abbey has a memory, but what kind of memory? Is it the memory of the nuns who vanished, or the memory of the monks who built it? Or is it the memory of the ones who never left? Some say it's the wind, others say it's the ghosts. But the thing is, no one's ever been able to recreate the sound. It just happens, like a secret only the abbey knows. And you know what's really strange? The sound seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Like the abbey is whispering to itself, trying to remember what it once was. So, if you ever find yourself standing in the abbey, and you hear that sound, don't be surprised. Just remember, the walls may be old, but they're still learning how to speak. Some say the walls don't just whisper, they hum. A low, steady tone that echoes through the stone like the heartbeat of something ancient, something still alive. The locals call it the abbey's song, though no one can agree on what it means. Some say it's a warning. Others think it's just the wind, or the memory of 1,000 prayers. But there's a darker theory, one whispered behind closed doors. Some believe the abbey holds a secret, something buried not in the earth, but in its very bones. They say the abbey was built on a site of old pagan worship, and that the stones still remember the rituals, the blood, the voices that once filled these halls. So when the walls begin to wail, it's not just the wind, it's the past trying to speak, and the present listening. But not everyone is ready to hear what it has to say. And yet, the walls still whisper. No one can say for sure what they're saying, but the locals swear it's not the wind, not the stones, but something older. Something that still remembers. The recordings are inconsistent. Some say it's a wail, others a sob, and a few swear they hear a child's laughter. But the voices never come through clearly just enough to make your skin crawl. Experts have tried everything. Acoustic analysis, geophones, even thermal scans. But the sound is never where they expect it to be. It's like the Abbey itself is alive, and it's trying to tell us something. Some say the Abbey is trying to protect its secrets. Others believe it's simply waiting for someone to finally listen. And until then, the walls will keep their wail and their silence. You've heard the echoes of Dunfermline, felt the weight of its silence, and wondered if the walls still remember. But sometimes, the truest ghosts are the ones that never speak at all. Perhaps the walls don't need to wail. Maybe they just need to hold on, to keep the stories alive, even when the voices have faded. As the night deepens, and the world grows still, the Abbey may just whisper its secrets to those who know how to listen. But for now, let's leave the Abbey to its silence. And maybe, just maybe, let's leave the stories to the shadows. You've heard of haunted castles and cursed forests, but Elgin Cathedral? That's a place that whispers in the dark. It's in the Scottish Highlands, surrounded by mist and memory. Built in the 12th century, it's one of the oldest and most beautiful Gothic cathedrals in Scotland. But beneath its beauty, there's a story that doesn't quite end. Some say it's the voice of a long-dead priest, others that it's the wail of a grieving mother. But no one can agree on what it sounds like, just that it's there, and it's loud. This place has seen centuries of history, war, and sorrow. And now, it seems, it's holding on to something it can't let go of. What could it be? You know, the cathedral wasn't always a place of prayer. Back in 1445, it was a battleground of ideas, and one man's ambition set it all in motion. Sir William Elgin, a knight with a heart full of pride and a pocket full of gold, saw the cathedral as his legacy. He didn't just want to build a church, he wanted to build a monument to himself. A cathedral that would echo his name for centuries. But stone doesn't shout, and the walls of Elgin Cathedral have something else to say. The work took decades, and the laborers' men, women, and children were paid in coin and in hope. But hope has a price, and the walls began to weep before they were even complete. The whispers started in the stones, and no one knew where they came from. Some say the stones were cursed, others that the voices were the souls of those who died building the cathedral. But the truth is, the walls didn't just scream, they remembered. And they still do. You remember the first time you heard it, didn't you? That low, almost musical hum, like a distant church bell, but wrong somehow. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the echo of a stone wall. At first, you thought it was the old stone settling. But then you noticed the others people in the church standing in silence, their eyes wide, their hands clutched to their chests, as if they just felt something too heavy to name. But the hum grew louder, and the silence in the church felt like it was holding its breath. You started to wonder, what was it remembering? And who was it remembering for? It was then you realized the cathedral wasn't just haunted. It was waiting for something or someone to finally answer the call. You've heard the whispers, but have you ever wondered what it was that cried out from those ancient stones? A child's voice, echoing through the cathedral's halls, or something far more tragic? In 1918, a young girl named Margaret vanished without a sound. The village whispered that she had been taken by the walls themselves, that the cathedral had a will of its own. The last time anyone heard her voice was a night of thunder, when the cathedral seemed to scream with her, the sound reverberating through the stones like a warning. To this day, the walls still echo with a sound that isn't quite a voice, but something else entirely, something that waits, and watches, and remembers. I remember the first time I heard it. A woman in her 70s said it came through the stone like a whisper, like the walls were breathing. She told me it wasn't the wind, it wasn't the echo, something was in there, waiting. One night, a local tour guide claimed he heard a voice, not a scream, but a name, Margaret, echoing through the nave. He said it was like the stones were trying to tell a story, but he couldn't understand the words. There's a story about a child who vanished in the 1940s, and the walls still echo with the sound of her laughter. Some say it's just the wind, but others swear it's a warning someone is still here. Even the caretaker, who's been here for 30 years, admits he sometimes hears it at night. He doesn't say what it is, just that it's not the wind. It's something older, something that never left. So, what do you think it is? A gust? An energy? Or just the weight of history pressing down on these ancient stones? I'll tell you this: when the wind stops, the walls still speak. We started by walking through the nave, and the silence was so thick it felt like it had been there for centuries. The stone walls seemed to hum with something just out of reach, like a memory that hadn't quite faded. The first thing the team noticed was the way the sound seemed to bounce off the walls, not just echo, but a kind of vibration, like the building itself was alive and breathing. When we checked the archives, we found a 17th century account of a monk who vanished in the crypt, his last words being "the walls are screaming." No one ever found him, and the crypt has been sealed ever since. The team also discovered that in 1893, a group of teenagers had disappeared during a night tour, and their only clue was a set of footprints leading into the shadows behind the choir. What struck me most was how every account, no matter the century, described the same thing: a sound, a presence, and a feeling of being watched. The cathedral wasn't just haunted, it was remembering. You see, no one can explain why the walls still scream. Some say it's the memory of the stone itself, others think it's the echo of a prayer gone wrong. But the truth, it's still out there, hiding in the shadows of history. There's a part of the cathedral where the sound seems to come from nowhere. It's like the walls are breathing, or maybe they're trying to tell us something we've forgotten. No one has ever been able to pinpoint the source. It's like the walls are trying to remember something, or maybe they're waiting for someone to finally listen. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And that's the one thing that's always stayed with me. The screaming walls of Elgin Cathedral. The sound, the silence, and the truth that's still waiting to be found. Some say the whispers come from the stones themselves, ancient voices trapped by time and mortar. Others insist they're just the wind trying to speak through the cracks in the walls. There's a local legend about a choir boy who vanished in the 1800s, his voice said to have been heard echoing through the cathedral long after he was gone. Others think it's not ghosts at all, but a warning. Some say the cathedral is a prison for the souls of the wicked, and the walls scream when they're found. In any case, the people here still come to the cathedral, not for worship, but for the stories. They say the walls still listen, and sometimes they answer. You know, sometimes the most haunting things are the ones we can't explain. And Elgin Cathedral? It's like the walls are still whispering that unsolved mystery, like a ghost with no name. The story of the vanished monk? It's like a forgotten chapter in a book that never closed. We don't know if he was taken or if he took himself, but the silence is louder than any scream. And here's the thing: Elgin Cathedral doesn't just hold history, it holds questions, and it doesn't let go. Maybe it's waiting for someone to finally listen. So the next time you pass by, maybe you'll hear it too. That whisper in the wind, that echo in the stone. It's still there, waiting for someone to understand. You've heard the whispers of Elgin Cathedral, felt the weight of centuries in its stone. But sometimes, the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. The walls don't just remember the past, they carry it. And sometimes, they scream for the ones who never found peace. There's something about the way the wind moves through those arches, the way the light fades at dusk. It's like the building is holding its breath. And as you leave, you might hear it again, just a whisper, a sigh, a sound that never quite fades. It's not the cathedral that's screaming, it's the stories inside. But don't be afraid to listen. Sometimes, the silence is the most terrifying sound of all. You've heard of castles with secrets, but Elsinore? That's a place where the stones themselves seem to hold their breath. It's in Denmark, of course, but the whispers have found their way across the Atlantic like a ghost story carried by the wind. The locals say it's not just the architecture that makes it feel ancient, it's the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the way it feels like the castle is listening, like it's waiting for something to say. They tell of a young queen who once ruled here, her laughter echoing through the halls, but her fate was sealed in a tower that now stands empty, its windows like empty eyes watching the world below. And then there are the whispers, soft, unintelligible, like a language from another time. Some say it's the queen's voice, others claim it's the spirit of a child lost in the castle's maze of corridors. But the most chilling part? No one knows for sure what the castle wants. It just keeps waiting, like a story that's only beginning to unfold. You know, the castle wasn't always a place of whispers and shadows. Back in the 1400s, it was the seat of power for the Danish crown, and its halls echoed with the voices of kings and queens. The most famous of these royals was King Hamlet, whose tragic death sparked the events that would later become Shakespeare's Hamlet, a story that's been retold for centuries. But the truth is far more complicated. The castle was more than just a palace, it was a place of political intrigue, where alliances were forged and broken, and where the line between love and betrayal blurred like the fog that clings to these walls. But even as it stood as a symbol of power, the castle began to take on a life of its own. The first whispers came during the reign of King Hamlet's son, the young prince who would later become the tragic hero of a play that's still haunting us today. So you see, the history of Elsinore isn't just about kings and queens, it's about the people who lived, loved, and died here, and how their stories became part of the castle itself. You remember the first time you heard it, just a whisper, like the wind through old timbers, but it wasn't the wind. It was something else, something that had been there long before the castle was built. The keepers said it was the sound of the river, but the river was miles away, and the sound didn't come from the walls, it came from the walls themselves, like the stone was breathing. You asked the old caretaker if he heard it too, and he just chuckled and said, "You're not the first to come here thinking you're alone." But his eyes were too wide and his hands too steady. And then, one night, you heard it again, but this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a name you didn't recognize, but somehow, you knew it was yours. You ever hear the walls whisper? They say it's not the wind, it's something older. Something that knows the names of the dead. In 1942, a young mother named Clara vanished without a trace. Her husband claimed he heard her scream from the basement, but no one believed him. The police found her scarf in the garden tangled in ivy, but the ivy was dead. No one could explain how it had been cut, yet remained untouched. They say Clara never left, that she became part of the walls, her voice trapped in the stones, waiting for someone to listen. And if you're ever in Elsinore, don't let the walls whisper to you. They might just answer. One of the most unsettling accounts came from a retired librarian named Margaret, who spent a month in Elsinore as a research fellow. She said the castle seems to hold its breath when you're alone. She claimed the walls would whisper in the dead of night, not in words, but in a low, vibrating hum that made her bones ache. It felt like the castle was singing a lullaby to the ghosts within. Another visitor, a young couple in the 1970s, claimed they heard a child's laughter echoing from the West Tower. When they tried to investigate, the sound stopped abruptly and the walls seemed to close in around them. The most chilling story, though, comes from a local farmer who said the castle isn't just haunted, it's alive. He swore the stones shift underfoot and the wind carries voices that aren't his own. Each of these accounts, though different, shares the same eerie thread. Elsinore isn't just a place, it's a presence, and it's been waiting for someone to listen. We started with the basics, checking for things like old fireplaces and hidden rooms, but the castle was as quiet as a tomb. You ever tried to listen to silence? It's not nothing, it's a kind of noise. Then we found the book, a leather-bound journal, tucked behind a loose panel in the library. It was written in a hand that felt like it belonged to someone who'd never stopped writing. The key didn't fit anything until we found the old drawing. It showed a spiral staircase, hidden behind a tapestry that had been hanging in the same spot for centuries. We pulled the tapestry back, and there it was, a narrow stairway, dark and cold, leading down into the earth. You ever felt like you were being watched from the dark? That's what we felt, the whole time. You know, the real mystery isn't the ghost. It's the one detail that has never been explained. Every book, every report, every story, no one ever mentions it. It's like someone erased it from history. The caretaker said it was a mistake, a misplaced ledger, a misfiled note. But that's not how it looked. It was too deliberate, like someone wanted it forgotten. Some say it was a love letter. Others say it was a confession. But no one knows who it was addressed to or who wrote it. Just that it was left behind, never sent. And here's the thing, no one ever found it. Not even the people who searched for decades. It vanished like it was never there, or like it was never meant to be found. So what was it? A clue? A warning? Or just a secret that was never meant to be known? That's the one detail that has never been explained. You've heard the stories, but the locals still tell their own. Some say the whispers come from a lost love, others insist it's the ghost of a traitor. What if the castle remembers more than we ever will? They say the voices change with the seasons, soft and sweet in spring, sharp and bitter in winter. Some say the castle itself is alive, and it's not done with us yet. A few locals still gather in the old tavern, drinking warm brandy and swapping tales. They say the castle is watching, and it's not judging, it's remembering. Some say the whispers are just the wind, others say that the voices of the dead. But if you listen closely, you might just hear the castle breathe. You see, the mystery of Elsinore Castle isn't just about the ghosts, it's about the people who vanished without a trace. Some say they were taken by the castle itself, others believe they were lost to time, but no one has ever found a single clue. There were rumors of a hidden chamber beneath the Great Hall, a place where the walls would speak in hushed tones. Some claim they heard whispers guiding lost travelers to safety, others say they heard pleas for help that never came. quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. To this day, the castle remains a place of quiet mystery, a living monument to the unknown. Some say it's haunted, others say it's simply waiting for the right person to uncover its secrets. So, what do you think? Was it a curse, a trick of the mind, or something far more real? The castle doesn't care about your answer, it just waits, always, for the next curious soul to come knocking. You've heard the whispers, felt the chill, and now you're left with the silence. Sometimes, the quietest places hold the loudest secrets. But remember, the stories don't end when the fire goes out. They linger in the spaces between the breaths, waiting for the right listener to hear them. Now, before we move on, let me ask you, what do you hear when the world goes quiet? A whisper? A sigh? Or something else entirely? Stay curious, stay warm, and never forget that the most haunting stories are the ones that never truly end. You've heard of the Stanley Hotel, haven't you? That grand old place in the Rockies where the snow never quite lets up and the ghosts are always waiting for you. Built in the early 1900s, it was meant to be a winter wonderland for the wealthy, but it's been a home to more than just the rich. It's a place where the past lingers like a cold wind. There are stories of lost luggage, of rooms that stay warm even when the fire's out, and of a woman who vanished in the 1960s and never left a trace. The Stanley's reputation is like the snow on the mountains. It's heavy, it's quiet, and it's never going to melt. So, are you ready to step inside? Or will you stay in the car and let the ghosts keep their secrets? You know, the Stanley Hotel wasn't always the grand, stately place you imagine. Back in 1879, it was just a modest wooden building, a humble hotel with a story of its own, built by a man who had more than a little ambition. That man was Henry Stanley, a businessman with a vision and a bit of a temper. He built the hotel with his own hands, or so they say, and it was his pride and joy. But it wasn't just about the building, it was about the promise of the Rockies. The hotel was meant to be a gateway to the mountains, a place where people could rest and explore the wild. But it took years to finish, years of snow, setbacks, and a few near bankruptcies. Yet Henry refused to give up, and eventually, it rose from the earth like a phoenix. By the time it opened in 1884, it was a marvel. A place of elegance, of warmth, of stories waiting to be told. And though Henry passed away before he saw it fully realized, the hotel continued to grow, and with it, its legend. But even the grandest of places has secrets. And the Stanley Hotel, with its long history and strange happenings, was about to become the setting for something far more mysterious than just a business deal. You remember that first strange thing, don't you? The way the lights flickered just as you were about to fall asleep, like someone was flicking a switch in the dark. Then the clock started to tick backwards. It wasn't just the sound, it was the way the hands moved, like time itself was trying to escape. The staff started to vanish, one by one. Not in the way people disappear from the world, but in the way they just stop showing up for work. And then the whispers, not from the walls, but from the people. You could hear them in the silence, like the hotel was breathing with you. You thought it was the hotel, but deep down, you knew it was something else. Something that had been waiting for you. You remember the storm that night, don't you? The sky was a bruised purple, and the wind howled like it was trying to tear the world apart. The hotel's windows rattled like they were alive, and the lights flickered like a dying heartbeat. The phones didn't work. No one could reach anyone, and the power went out just as the last guest was settling in. The silence that followed was louder than the storm, heavy with the weight of something unseen. The staff didn't know what to do. They tried to find the source of the sound, but the building was too dark, and the silence after the groan was thick with fear. Some said they heard it again, like a hand scraping against the wall, or a door creaking open. And then, the lights came back on, just as suddenly as they'd gone out. But the room that had been empty was now occupied. A single chair, a table, a lamp, just like the guests had left them. But no one was there. The next morning, the staff found a single pair of socks on the floor near the door. A sock, not a pair. And no one had been there. The hotel was quiet. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the scent of something wrong, something waiting. I remember the first time I heard about the Stanley Hotel. A friend told me it was the place where Stephen King wrote The Shining . But she also said the hotel had a way of making people feel like they were being watched, even when they were alone. Some say the hotel's ghosts are just the echoes of the past, like the voices of the guests who stayed there and never left. Others say they're the spirit of the workers who died in the hotel's dark history. There's a story about a guest who claimed to see a man in a tuxedo standing at the end of the hallway, watching her every move. She said the man never moved, never blinked, and only smiled when she turned around. One worker told me he'd heard the hotel whisper to him in the middle of the night. He said the whispers were in a language he didn't understand, but they always ended with the same word, stay. Asterisk? And then there was the woman who claimed she saw a child in the elevator, just standing there, smiling at her. She said the child had no face, and when she tried to run, the elevator doors closed just as she reached them. These stories don't just haunt the hotel, they haunt those who remember them. And sometimes, the hotel seems to remember them back. We began with the basics: interviews, old photos, and a few well-timed questions. The staff at the hotel had seen a lot, and some of them had grown up with the stories, like the one about the boy who kept asking for his mother. The most startling thing we found wasn't in a file, it was in the voices of the people who worked there. One cook told me about the night she heard a child's laughter echoing through the kitchen, even though no one was around. One of the most unsettling moments came when we found an old guest book from the 1950s. A name was written in a hurried, frantic hand, Lorraine, and next to it, a small, red X that looked like a mark of something wrong. We followed up on that name, and it led us to a tragic real-life story. Lorraine was a young woman who vanished in 1955, and her disappearance was never solved. The hotel staff had always known about her, but no one could say exactly what happened. The deeper we dug, the more the hotel seemed to whisper back. The staff, the history, the stories, they all pointed to something hidden, something that had been left behind in the silence of the building. And that's when we realized this wasn't just a haunted place. It was a place that remembered, and it was waiting for someone to finally listen. You ever notice how some things just refuse to be explained? Like that one detail about the Stanley Hotel's ghost that's been floating around for decades, but no one can agree on what it is. Some say it's the missing piano from the original hotel. Others insist it's the sound of a woman's voice echoing through the halls at midnight. But no one can say for sure what it is. And yet, every time someone tries to solve the mystery, the answer just disappears. Like the ghost itself is playing a game of hide and seek with the truth. So here's the thing, dear listener, maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Maybe they're meant to linger, like the echo of a song you can't quite remember. And if you're wondering what that sound was you heard in the hallway, well, I think it's just the hotel remembering its own story. You've heard the rumors, but let me tell you what the locals whispered by the firelight. Some say the hotel's spirit is the ghost of a lost love, trapped between the life she lived and the one she never got to live. Others believe it's the shadow of a writer who never finished his masterpiece, his words still clinging to the walls like smoke in a closed room. And some say it's not a ghost at all, it's the hotel itself, breathing, waiting. There's even a theory that the hotel's spirit is a manifestation of the town's grief, a collective memory of the people who have passed through these halls and never left. No one knows for sure, but the Stanley Hotel has a way of making you believe, even when you don't want to. And that, dear listener, is the most haunting thing of all. You know, sometimes the scariest things aren't the ghosts, but the questions that never get answered. What if the Stanley Hotel's mystery isn't just about the past, but about the people who still live with it? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot, the smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. There are rumors of whispers in the halls, of doors opening on their own, of shadows that don't belong. But the real mystery, why does the hotel still feel like it's watching us? Some say the hotel holds onto the memories of those who stay here, especially the ones who never left. But what if it's not the hotel that's haunted? What if it's the people who still can't let go? And then there's the unanswered call, the one that doesn't come through on the phone, but still lingers in your mind. Like the hotel is trying to tell you something, but it's just not saying it right. Maybe the real mystery isn't about the ghosts. Maybe it's about us, about the stories we keep, the lives we let fade, and the places that refuse to forget. So, what do you think? Is the Stanley Hotel still watching? Or is it just waiting for someone to finally ask the right question? As the last candle flickers, I wonder if the Stanley Hotel still whispers in the dark, or if it's just the wind that carries the echo of a forgotten song. You've heard the tales, but have you ever wondered what it's like to sleep in a place where the past won't let you go? Maybe the real horror isn't the ghost, but the silence that follows when you finally leave. So, what will you do when the story ends and the fire goes out? Will you remember, or will you forget? Good night, and remember, some places don't forget you, no matter how far you go. You ever heard of Carlsbad Caverns? Deep in the desert of New Mexico, where the sun beats down and the earth whispers secrets. It's a place of wonder, but some say the caves have a voice of their own. The caves are vast, with towering stone pillars and glowing mineral formations. But the locals tell tales of echoes that don't belong to anyone. A sound, sometimes, that seems to come from the walls themselves. Some say the caves are a gateway to something older, something that doesn't belong to this world. And that something, they say, is still trying to find its way back. But what if the caves are just listening? What if the sound you hear isn't a voice at all, but a warning? And what if it's been waiting for someone to finally listen? You know, the Carlsbad Caverns weren't always a place of silence. Back in the 1800s, this land was home to the native people, the Kiowa, and later the Comanche. They knew these caves better than anyone, whispering stories of spirits that roamed the stone. Then came the miners, brave and foolish, drawn by the promise of gold and silver. They carved their way into the earth, not knowing the price of their curiosity. The caves were never meant to be conquered. Some say the first recorded disappearance was in 1896. A young man named James O'Hara vanished while exploring the lower cave. His boots were found at the entrance, but his body was never found. The stories say he heard a voice calling him back. The locals called it the Singing Stones, a name that might have come from the echoes of those who disappeared. Some say the caves hum with a warning, a low, mournful sound that only the lost can hear. And so, the Carlsbad Caverns became more than just a natural wonder. It became a place of mystery where the past still echoes through the stone. The silence, you see, is just the cave holding its breath. You see it now, the first crack in the silence, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like the wind trying to whisper something it shouldn't. It's not the wind, though. It's the caverns themselves, holding their breath. Tour guides start to notice it too, this sound, this feeling, like the walls are pressing in just a little more. Some say it's the echo of footsteps from long ago. Others say it's the whisper of a spirit still trapped in the stone. Then the temperature drops. Not just a breeze, but chill that lingers on your skin, like the caverns are trying to tell you something they don't want you to hear. One of the guides, a man named Joe, insists he heard it too, a voice, low and mournful, calling his name. He says it came from deep inside the cave, but when he tried to follow it, he never found the source. The next morning, the tour is cancelled. No one wants to go back, but some say the cave never really lets go. It remembers, it waits, and it sings in a language we can't yet understand. You remember the silence, don't you? That's the first thing you notice when you step into the Carlsbad Caverns. No birds, no insects, just the sound of your own breath echoing through the stone. But then you hear it just a whisper, like a voice caught in the rock. It's not part of the cave, it's something else, something waiting. The last visitor to this cave was a young woman named linger. She was here for the weekend, and she never came out. Her lantern was found in the farthest chamber, still burning, but she was never found. They say the cave remembers, that it holds the echoes of every lost soul who entered. And some say, if you listen closely enough, you can hear the silence that followed. So when you visit, you'll hear the whisper again, but you'll also feel the weight of the silence. And maybe, just maybe, you'll wonder if you're the next one who won't come back. I've spoken to several hikers who swear they heard whispers in the stone, like someone calling their name just out of reach. One man said he saw a shadow move behind a stalagmite, but when he turned, there was nothing. Another woman claimed she felt a cold wind blow through her despite the cave being warm. She said it was like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving her gasping for breath. One ranger told me that during a storm, he heard a child's laughter echoing through the cavern, so clear it made his skin crawl. He said it stopped as suddenly as it began, like someone had turned off a switch. There's a sense of being watched, of being followed, even when you know you're alone. It's not the cave itself that's scary, it's the feeling that you're not the first to wander these halls, and you won't be the last. We followed the trail of whispers into the heart of the caverns, where the air grew thick and heavy, like a secret held for centuries. The silence was so complete, it felt like the rocks themselves were holding their breath. The guide spoke of a place called the Devil's Kitchen, where the echoes were said to carry voices not from the present, but from the past. Some said they could hear laughter, others a child's cry, but no one could say for sure what they were hearing. One of the researchers, a young woman with a quiet courage, claimed she saw a figure in the distance, a silhouette standing at the edge of a pool, watching her with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. When we returned to the surface, the echoes had faded, but the feeling lingered. Some said the caverns had always been haunted, and others said we had disturbed something that had been waiting a long time. We left with more questions than answers, but the silence of the caverns still lingers in our minds, like a song we can't quite remember, only that it was beautiful and terribly sad. You know, the thing that has never been explained is the sound of the screams. Not the echoes, not the whispers, but the actual, unmistakable sound of someone screaming. It's the one thing that ties all these stories together. No one has ever heard it, not really, but the recordings, the tapes, the old radio logs, they all say the same thing. A woman's voice, high and raw, echoing through the stone like a ghost in a cathedral. Some say it's a trick of the acoustics, others say it's a warning. But the real question is, who was screaming and why did the caverns never let them go? And the thing is, no one has ever found the source. Just like the story itself, it's still out there, waiting to be heard or maybe, finally, understood. You've heard the stories, but let me tell you what the locals actually whisper. They say the caves don't just echo, they remember. Some say the echoes are the voices of those who never made it out. There's a legend about a cave guide who vanished in the 1930s. His last words were said to be a warning, "Don't follow the light." But no one knows if he was lost, or if he was trying to save others from something worse. Some say the caves are haunted by the voices of the lost, those who were never found. Others believe it's just the sound of water, echoing through the stone, making it seem like someone is calling out. Theories range from ancient rituals to a natural phenomenon that mimics human cries. But one thing is certain, no one who enters the caves ever says they heard nothing. It's easy to laugh at the stories, but if you ever stood in that silence, you'll understand. The caves don't just hold secrets, they hold voices that won't let go. You know, sometimes the most haunted places are the ones you expect. Carlsbad Caverns, with its glowing soda straws and whispering stone, has always had a soft spot for the lost. But some stories don't end. They just linger. The last known sighting of the missing woman was just a few years ago. She was a geologist, curious and brave, exploring the depths with a small team. Her last radio transmission was a whisper, "Something's not right here." Then silence. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. No bodies were ever found. No footprints. Just a trail of unanswered questions and a faint, echoing sound like a voice, but not quite. Some say it's the wind. Others say it's her, still calling out from the dark. The local ranger said she was always a curious soul. Maybe that's why she went in so deep. Maybe that's why she never came back. But I wonder, did she find what she was looking for? Or did something find her first? To this day, the caverns remain silent. But sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear just a whisper, like a voice caught in the stone. And it's still waiting for someone to answer. You've heard the whispers in the stone, felt the weight of time pressing down on these ancient halls. But what if the silence is the loudest scream of all? Sometimes, the most haunted places aren't the ones that shout, but the ones that hold their breath too long. There's a story in every drop of water, every whisper of wind, and every still moment that feels too long. And as we leave these silent halls, we carry with us the question, what's listening when we're not? You ever heard a cathedral whisper? Elgin Cathedral, in the Scottish Highlands, is said to have walls that scream, not just in the wind, but in the silence. A place where the stones remember. Built in the 12th century, it's one of Scotland's oldest. But something about its architecture, those tall, narrow windows and the way the light cuts through makes people uneasy. Some say it's haunted by the voices of the dead. People say you can hear it at night, a sound like a child crying, or a woman's voice echoing through the stone. Some say it's the ghost of a nun who died in the 1500s, trapped between the pews and the altar. The cathedral has been called the Screaming Walls for centuries. Some say the voices are just the wind, but others swear they hear something else. A warning, perhaps, or a memory that won't fade. It's a place of mystery, where the past lingers like a shadow. And if you're ever in the Highlands, I'd say it's worth a visit. Just don't be surprised if the walls start to speak. You know, the first whispers of the Screaming Walls began in the 14th century, when a young monk named Brother Alan took refuge in Elgin Cathedral after a brutal attack by raiders. His screams echoed through the stone, and the walls seemed to answer. The monks claimed he was cursed, that his blood had stained the stones and awakened something ancient. They sealed the West Tower, saying it was a tomb for a forgotten king, but the screams didn't stop. By the time the Reformation came, the cathedral was already a place of fear. The Protestants destroyed the altar, but not before a woman named Isabel MacTavish claimed to hear the walls weep in the dead of night. Isabel's last words were about a hidden chamber beneath the nave, where the screams were strongest. She never found it, but the legend of the Screaming Walls grew louder with every passing year. And so the cathedral became more than a place of worship, it became a place of haunting. A place where the dead still speak, and the walls still scream, waiting for someone to listen. You remember the first time you heard it, don't you? A whisper in the wind, a faint echo, like someone just stood there and said your name. It was so quiet, you almost thought you were imagining it. Then came the nights. You would hear it again, but louder now, like a child's laughter, or a sigh, or a voice that didn't belong to anyone you knew. You told yourself it was just the wind, but you couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. People began to notice it too. A couple of tourists said they heard voices at night, or felt a cold draft where there was none. Some even said the air smelled like old wine or burning wood, though no one could say from where. And then, the first real sign that something was truly wrong. A local historian said he heard a sound like a child crying, but when he went to check, the echo was gone. Just like that. No one else heard it. No one else saw anything. That's when the whispers started to change. They grew louder, more desperate. And the walls, they began to scream. You know, sometimes the silence is the most terrifying sound of all. Imagine standing in the stillness of Elgin Cathedral, where the air feels thick with the weight of centuries, and then silence. No wind, no echo, just the sound of your own breath. It was the year 1585, and the Reformation had left the town in turmoil. The cathedral, once a place of worship, now stood as a symbol of defiance and despair. One night, a woman vanished, no trace, no warning, just a door left ajar, as if she'd simply stepped through the veil. The townsfolk whispered that the cathedral was cursed, that the stones themselves were hungry. They said the walls had learned to remember, to hold on to the voices of the lost, and that the screams were not just from the past, but from the present, trapped and waiting. To this day, the cathedral still holds its breath. Some say you can hear it, the sound of a voice, a name, a plea, echoing from the depths just before the silence returns, and the walls once again fall into the stillness. I've spoken to several locals who swear they've heard the cathedral's walls whisper. One man, a retired teacher, said the sound comes from the choir stalls like someone is trying to speak through the stone. Another woman, a lifelong resident, claims she's heard the walls scream during a storm. She said it wasn't the wind, she described it as a low, guttural sound, like something trapped inside the stone is crying out. One visitor, a young artist, said the walls seemed to pulse with a heartbeat during her stay. She described the sound as rhythmic, like the cathedral itself was alive and breathing. No one can agree on what the sounds mean, but they all agree on one thing: Elgin Cathedral isn't just a place of worship. It's a place where the past refuses to stay buried. We began our investigation with a simple question. What if the cathedral wasn't just haunted, but remembering something? What if these walls were trying to tell us something we hadn't heard in centuries? The first thing we found was a 16th century ledger filled with names, dates, and a single recurring phrase: the stone that weeps. It wasn't a name, it was a warning. We followed the carvings to a hidden passage beneath the choir, a place that hadn't been used in over 300 years. It was like stepping into a forgotten dream, cold and still, with the echo of footsteps that weren't ours. In the tunnel, we found a small chamber with a stone slab and a single, rusted key. It was the kind of clue that made your spine tingle. It wasn't just a clue, it was an invitation. As we stood there, the air grew colder, the silence heavier, and the walls seemed to shift just enough for us to believe that, for a moment, we weren't alone. You know, there's one thing that's never made sense to me about Elgin Cathedral: why the walls still scream, even when no one's around to hear them. They say the sound comes from the stones themselves, like a whisper from the past, but I've never been able to place the origin of the scream. Some say it's the voice of a child who died in the cathedral centuries ago, trapped between the pews and the pillars, never able to be found. But the real mystery is that no one has ever been able to find the source of the scream. It just happens. Sometimes at night, sometimes in the silence of morning. And the thing is, no one ever knows when it's going to come. One moment, everything is still. The next, the walls are screaming. Adad! Some say the stones remember. Others insist the wind is just wind. But the locals still whisper that the cathedral's walls are not silent at all. They tell of voices in the stones. Not the kind you hear with your ears, but the kind that hums in your bones at midnight. One theory suggests the cathedral's foundation was built on ancient burial grounds. The stones, they say, are holding on to a past that refuses to rest. Another local legend claims the ghosts of the cathedral's builders still roam the halls, their voices echoing through the arches like a choir of the damned. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. The screaming walls of Elgin Cathedral are not just a place. They are a memory, a warning, and a whisper in the dark. You know, some mysteries don't just fade away, they cling to the walls, whispering in the dark. Even now, over a century later, the echoes of that night refuse to be silenced. The official records say nothing. No bodies, no sightings, no closure. Just a cold case that's kept the town on edge for generations, like the walls themselves are holding their breath. Every so often, someone claims to hear it again, those same screams, the same cold touch. But no one will talk about it, not even the locals. It's like the cathedral has its own secrets, and it's not ready to let them go. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And so, we sit here, with the wind in our ears and the silence heavy in the air. The story isn't over, not by a long shot. It's just waiting for someone to listen. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.